Chapter 187. Lothar leisurely walked down the stairs. His metal boots stepped on the marble stairs, making a clanking sound. It doesn't feel good to be looked down upon. Did I not kill enough orcs on the battlefield? Lothar mocked himself as he walked. Later, you can hold Black Hand's head and look down on the orcs. Duque was the one who orchestrated all of this. He let Black Hand fight Lothar, who shouldn't be fighting now, but Duque was full of confidence. In the original history, Black Hand died a rather useless death. After Orgrim used torture to get the location of the Shadow Council, Orgrim decisively challenged Makara, under the witness of thousands of orcs. In that duel, Black Hand had the absolute upper hand. The huge rock hand completely ignored Orgrim's hammer and easily beat Orgrim up. However, the cunning Orgrim suddenly made his move. During the duel, he suddenly looked behind Black Hand in shock, as if he saw Gul'dan. His mouth also seemed to say Gul'dan. Black Hand, who was all brawn and no brains, actually believed it. That moment of distraction immediately gave Orgrim the chance to smash his head with his hammer. Haha, the great chief Black Hand might be really powerful, but Black Hand was a brainless child. If Lothar really couldn't beat him, then Lothar's name should be written backwards as Salo Induin. It had nothing to do with the honest, righteous, and heroic young man Duque. Ah! The orc guard charged. Once that huge body charged, it was no different from a charging rhinoceros. That kind of terrifying pressure would make a timid person pee in their pants. Close! Close! Even closer! The huge double-edged battle-axe suddenly chopped down. Under the moonlight, it created a cold arc. It was a terrifying force that could split a grown man, along with his shield, into two halves from head to toe. However, Lothar used a Marseille spin. Forgive Duque for using a football term to describe Lothar. However, after seeing through the enemy's simple and brutal attack route, Lothar instantly made a gorgeous turn. This action reminded Duque of Zidane. It was equally dashing and full of artistic beauty. Noxus turned around with his left leg as a fulcrum and easily dodged the thunderous axe strike. He then held his sword in a reverse grip and gently pushed it forward, as if he was playing with a sword. The sharp king's sword pierced through the gap between the orc guard's helmet and armor as he turned slightly to the right. Blood splattered everywhere. The blade of the sword pierced through the orc guard's jaw without any resistance and went straight through his brain. Until the moment of his death, the orc's eyes were still filled with confusion and shock. Lothar's long hair, which was fluttering due to the rapid rotation, lay meekly on his shoulder under the effect of gravity. He easily killed the enemy, and his hair was not messed up. Handsome. So cool. Furthermore, it was an instant kill. He gently pulled out his sword and let the dead orc's huge body fall with a loud bang. Blood spurted out from behind him. Noxus swung his sword, and the dirty blood beads fell on the floor tiles. Lothar walked slowly toward Black Hand. One step, another and another. With every step he took, his unparalleled domineering aura became stronger. SSSSS. The orcs gasped in unison. They had the same thought. This guy is indeed worthy of being the best human warrior. Ha ha ha. The chief Black Hand let out a burst of hearty laughter. He was not the slightest bit angry because of the death of his guard. Instead, Lothar's gorgeous steps attracted his attention. Pushing aside the guards in front of him, Black Hand strode forward proudly. Ha 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 ha. Not bad. You're not bad. Indeed, you're qualified to challenge me, Duque's translator said. Anduin, this arrogant guy has agreed to fight you. Lothar stood 10 meters away from Black Hand and smiled. Duque, tell this guy to smile more while he can. I don't want him to still have that ugly smile on his face when I cut off his head. Duque translated. Black Hand didn't care at all. Mocking each other before the battle started was definitely a part of the duel. Tell this human warrior that as long as it's a warrior's head, I will preserve it well. Before Duque could translate, Lothar had already cursed. You can deal with the harsh words yourself. God knows if he'll think that I'm going to kiss his shoes if I call him a coward. Orcs don't wear shoes. Duque shrugged. Lothar rolled his eyes at Duque. Duque said helplessly, All right. Black Hand, we humans are much more civilized than you. Lothar said that he'll cut off your head and seal it in ice to ensure that it's fresh and intact. If any humans knew that Duque had translated it like that, they would definitely complain. How civilized can that be? However, the orcs did not care. Perhaps it was the strong enemy killed by Makara that had the value of preserving the enemy's head. At this time, Orgrim held the Blackrock clan's flag with one hand and strode forward, handing it to Black Hand. The great chief seemed to casually throw the flag on the ground. He looked straight at Lothar, then at Duque. Duque understood. Your Majesty, the orcs throwing the flag means that they're sacrificing the glory of the entire clan. For the duel to stand, we have to do the same. Lang nodded. A flag bearer behind him walked down the stairs with his chest puffed out. He handed the golden lion flag with a blue background and golden edges to Lothar, who had sheathed his sword. Lothar took the flag and threw it out as well. It happened to be on top of the Blackrock clan's flag. Of course, the orcs did not realize Lothar's intentions. Makara. Orgrim raised his arms and shouted. His voice was like thunder. Orgrim's roar was followed by hundreds of thousands of orcs. In an instant, thousands of orcs shouted in unison, Makara. Hew, 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 hew. Every orc raised and put down their weapons, making a primal and heroic sound. Of course, Stormwind would not back down. King Lang stood up resolutely. He held his shield in his left hand and slammed the king's sword on the shield. Bang, 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 bang. Thousands of royal guards did the same action. Cold light flashed. Every lion emblem on the shield looked like a ferocious lion roaring. The warriors of Stormwind used this method to create an aura that was not any weaker than the hordes. In the air, it was as if thousands of swords and axes were clashing fiercely. Invisible sword shadows filled every corner of the night sky. Come! Lothar drew his sword again. Under the strong night wind, his hair fluttered in the wind. From afar, Lothar's hair looked like a lion's mane. Ha! The great tribal chief strode toward Lothar with heavy steps that shook the heavens and earth. Chapter 188. If the orc guards were like rampaging rhinoceroses, then Blackhand's attack was like a speeding heavy tank. His violent and unstoppable aura had shaken the 4 digits of human warriors on the scene. The great chief Blackhand, who was nearly 3.5 meters tall, was a giant among both humans and orcs. Some people might think that a giant like Blackhand would be slow in his movements. In fact, any enemy or challenger who had this thought would have their heads crushed by Blackhand. High strength meant slow speed, and high speed meant low strength. This formula didn't apply to Blackhand. Not only was Blackhand fast and strong, but he also had an advantage that no one else had. His weapons were his hands. People often said that a person wielding a sword was like an extension of his arm, and that was a very high level of mastery. However, no matter how agile a weapon was, it was impossible for it to be more agile than one's own hands. Blackhand had an advantage. Back then, when he helped Orgrim pull Doomhammer out of the lava, he almost lost both his arms. Not many people could withstand the blazing heat, and there was a shocking amount of fire elements. If it was an ordinary person's arm, it would have been charred into charcoal and broken in the lava. However, Blackhand's willpower, strength, muscles, and natural resistance to fire were all extremely powerful, and he managed to withstand the inferno at the mouth of the volcano. A large amount of fire elements attached to his arms and palms, which not only destroyed more than half of Blackhand's hand nerves, but also completely turned his skin and muscles below his arms into rock. That pair of heavy and shiny black hands had a strange luster that was between stone and metal. Although every joint below his arms could move flexibly, it was obviously beyond the realm of a living creature. If someone was stupid enough to chop off Blackhand's arms, the last thing that would fall off would be his head. Of course, Noxus wouldn't fall for it. Duque had repeatedly reminded him that if Noxus fell for it, then he wouldn't be Noxus, but an idiot. Noxus also dashed toward Blackhand with small steps. In the next second, a strong gust of wind rose from the ground. Before Blackhand made his move, no one would have thought that this great tribal chief's left arm's casual grab, such a simple sweep, would possess such terrifying might. It was an earth-shattering feeling that should only appear when the entire building collapsed. Just that gust of wind alone was enough to crush every inch of muscles on a person's face, teeth, and other bones. He couldn't even open his eyes, let alone see what was in front of him. For a moment, Duque had the illusion that Lothar had been killed without any suspense. It was too scary. That was a power and speed that the poor human imagination could not comprehend. That feeling was as if the other party had picked up a church door and slammed it down horizontally, turning you into mincemeat. The last sentence that remained in your mind was impossible. Fortunately, Duque's rationality dispelled his hallucinations. If he had really made a move just now, he would have disrupted this incomparably sacred duel in the eyes of the beast men. That would truly be a disaster. Lothar dodged and pounced like a ferocious tiger, then rolled forward on the ground to the right, avoiding the great chieftain's ferocious left-hand sweep. Not only that, but Noxus also used the blade of the king's sword to pull Black Hand's thigh that was as thick as a bull's thigh. Blood splattered. A long bloodstain appeared on the great chieftain's left thigh. Black Hand's leg armor did not play any role at all, as if the precious leather armor was just a thin piece of paper that could be torn to shreds. But this was not the end. Black Hand actually swung his right fist, turned around like a whirlwind, and suddenly punched down from the top right to the bottom left. There was a loud sound that was close to a sonic boom in the pitch-black sky. The fist that came crashing down was not like a giant stone object at all, but more like a blazing ball of lava. The release of fire elements that was equivalent to a mage throwing a fireball? How was this possible? Obviously, within a certain range, Black Hand had the power to control the fire elements. His domination level was quite high, even higher than the sky mage Duque. Duque's heart froze in an instant. If it wasn't Kilrog Deadeye, Orgrim, and Samuro who surrounded him when he went to set the fire a while ago, but Black Hand. If he was tricked by him, perhaps he would really have to run for his life. The temperature was comparable to that of lava. The power to kill with a single touch. Either of these 2 points would result in death. Every human warrior forgot to breathe as they stared at Lothar's incomparably small figure in front of Black Hand. However, Lothar still managed to dodge it. It was a strange movement that was a little like a spring bouncing back. He slammed the shield on the ground with his left hand and used the recoil force of his arm to bounce off the ground. Lothar's entire body actually rose into the air, and he barely dodged the fist's edge like he was juggling. With a loud tearing sound, the armor under Lothar's left rib was grazed, and the entire piece of armor, that was at least 5 millimeters thick, was torn off. It was even easier than tearing bread with his hands. A 1-meter-wide pit of flames suddenly appeared on the ground. SSS. Lang stood up in shock. Every human warrior broke out in a cold sweat for Lothar. Only Lothar stood up and curled his lips nonchalantly, as if the guy who almost died just now was not him. Haha, I'm liking your head more and more. Anduin. Black Hand laughed maniacally while ignoring the wound on his thigh, and continued to attack Lothar fiercely. Duque translated. Me too, Lothar said while dodging in a flustered manner. He was clearly a warrior, but it was as if he had activated the bandit's special skill, evasion. He had a 100% dodge rate. Duque translated again. Okay, let's fight each other. The speed of Black Hand's hand that had turned into rock suddenly increased greatly again. It was almost as fast as the sword sage's blade storm. However, Black Hand still couldn't deal any effective damage. It was impossible for Lothar to dodge every attack. However, as he took quick and accurate steps, he danced the epic-ranked shield on his left arm. His agile footwork, ingenious angle deflection, accurate unloading, and perfect use of various warrior skills allowed Lothar to be on par with Black Hand. No, that's not right. Because Black Hand's attacks were more extensive, Lothar's ghostly attacks left more than 10 wounds of varying depths on Black Hand. Following Black Hand's intense movements, every wound on his body was bleeding. Yes, he's bleeding. For a while, Black Hand could rely on his tyrannical body to hold on, but as time passed, the scales of victory would definitely tip in Lothar's favor. That was provided that Lothar didn't get hit by a heavy blow. That was the difference in size. Black Hand, who had stronger vitality, had many opportunities to make mistakes, but once Lothar made a mistake, he would be killed instantly. Chapter 189. The boorish roars of the orcs, and the uniform sound of the humans hitting their shields echoed throughout Stormwind City. Everyone worshipped heroes. Even in a large-scale battle where individual strength was becoming weaker and weaker, this bloody and heroic battle still stimulated the adrenal glands of every spectator, causing them to secrete a substance called fanaticism. Only the true masters could see that the scales of victory were still slowly tilting towards the humans. Orgrim was anxious. The great chief Black Hand must die, but not by the hands of a human. In a one-on-one duel to the death, how could the valiant orc chief die in the hands of a weak human? That would be a humiliation for all orcs in the tribe. Even if one day, the orcs conquered the entire planet of Azeroth, they would still be nailed to the pillar of shame, and this humiliation would be passed down. Even though he wanted Black Hand to die, Orgrim knew very well that at this moment, he and Black Hand had the same interests. Suddenly, the great chief unleashed his ultimate move. With a flip of his hand, he grabbed the two intact dragon skeletons that looked like crocodiles on his shoulder. The next moment, Black Hand threw the two skeletons out. In less than 1/100th of a second, the skeletons that were made up of hundreds of joints exploded. In the blink of an eye, they turned into hundreds of fragmentation bombs that contained blazing fire elements and shot towards Lothar. Lothar originally had the chance to dodge, but at this moment Orgrim cheated. Good. It sounded like Orgrim's adjutant was cheering for his boss. Why did he have to use the lion's roar to intimidate others? No. This was a warrior's fear-breaking roar. The earth-shattering roar was at least 150 decibels, and it clearly affected Lothar. Lothar's entire body trembled, and in that moment, Lothar lost the chance to dodge. It couldn't be helped at all. Even an experienced veteran like Noxus couldn't come up with a good remedy in a situation where he had lost the initiative. Lothar gave up on dodging, knelt down on one knee, and took the hit with his shield. Tut 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 tut. The barrage of attacks that were comparable to machine gun fire almost completely blew up Lothar's shield. After a round of skeletons of fire swept past, Lothar's shield became tattered, and light could be seen in several places. Fortunately, Lothar himself was not injured. The consequences were severe. Noxus had completely lost the skill block. "What are you doing?" Lang, Bolvar, and a few other high-ranking generals let out similar angry shouts. After Duque translated, Orgrim sneered. "I did not interfere. If a true warrior can't even withstand the cheers of the enemy, then he might as well die." His words almost drove Lang and the others crazy. At this time, Duque suddenly showed the same sneer. "You mean to say that using words and sound to affect the enemies in the arena is not considered cheating?" Orgrim did not speak, which was undoubtedly a tacit agreement. On the other side, Lothar was in a desperate situation. In terms of absolute strength and speed, Black Hand was superior to Noxus. Having lost his shield and unable to dodge, Lothar could only use his longsword to parry Black Hand's attack. For Black Hand's hands that were comparable to heavy hammers, a longsword like a light weapon was at a disadvantage. Unless it was psychic, a longsword could never be more agile than one's own hands. In the last incident where Medivh was killed, the king's sword had used up a lot of power. Lothar calculated, and could not use the power of the sword to chop off Black Hand's claws. Lothar's face was cold. Lang, Bolvar, and the others trembled all over. Lang almost wanted to shed all pretense of cordiality and let his subordinates do it. But in the end, they still focused their attention on Duque. "Watch me throw the cup as a signal." That was what Duque said. Once again, Black Hand forced Lothar into a corner. It was a corner of the square, with towering marble walls on both sides. There was no way to dodge at all. "Anduin Lothar, I will remember your name. But go to hell." The great chief let out a roar of victory. At this second, the cheers of the orcs reached their peak. The blazing cheers almost overturned the clouds in the sky. They shouted the greatness of the great chief, and praised Black Hand's bravery. As long as the number one human warrior was killed, the human great chief's head would be at their fingertips. This symbolized that the invincible orcs had once again conquered the weak foreign races. Supreme glory! The best Makara. In the next moment, the great chief's hands would shoot out like lightning with blazing heat, and the whistle of death. That would be the death of Lothar. Makara, as failure. The entire Stormwind, and the possible future failure of the Alliance. Without Lothar, there would be no such thing as a descendant of great Emperor Saladin. And it was still a question whether the Seven Kingdoms would still be united. At this moment, even Lothar's handsome face lost all color. Every human watching the battle clenched their fists. At this critical moment, Duque's light words entered the ears of the great chief. If I tell you that the Shadow Council sent someone to kill Orgrim's good friend, Durotan, and that Orgrim is plotting to overthrow you, the great chieftain, and that as long as you find out the location of the Shadow Council from Garona, who he captured, he'll kill you and wipe out the Shadow Council that killed his good friend. What would you think? Great Chief. At this critical moment, Duque would not have said such a long sentence. But Duque finished his sentence in an instant. This was a technique that Pharaoh specialized in. Repetition of incantations. Extract all the important syllables from a long sentence, and compress them into one, making a long incantation into a short paragraph. Of course, the sound produced was equivalent to pressing dozens of keys on a piano at the same time. With human hearing, it was impossible to distinguish this noise. And most repetition of incantations only reduced a 3-second incantation to 1 second. This was already very impressive. Duque had the system elf. This greatest king system could make the impossible possible. A long paragraph was forcibly compressed into a single note. However, as the receiver, Great Chief Blackhand heard every word clearly. As Gul'dan's hardcore, as a puppet among puppets, he was a model example of someone who would help others pay for using him. The Great Chief was furious, and suddenly turned his head to look at Orgrim. Orgrim? Ah. Lothar did not know why Blackhand was in a daze, but it did not stop Lothar from sliding between Blackhand's legs, and slashing at the forked part of Blackhand's thigh. There was a kind of pain in the world called pain in the balls, also known as the most painful pain for men. Blackhand could not control his body at all, and bent over in pain. In the next second, seeing that there was no time to lose, Lothar beautifully pierced through Blackhand's chest from behind. The dignified king's sword was once again used as a backstab, the sharp blade piercing through Blackhand's chest. But Blackhand did not care. He pointed at Orgrim and let out the last roar of his life. You traitor! Chapter 190. Time was completely frozen. Just a moment ago, the Great Chief was still having a smooth journey. Countless beastmen were cheering for the Great Chief's victory. The enthusiastic cheers almost shot up into the starry sky. On the other hand, everyone on the human side was sweating profusely. They couldn't wait to attack and kill the monstrous Great Chief, who was about to kill their great hero, Anduin Lothar, on the spot. The next moment, the plot took a 180-degree turn. Lothar, who was supposed to be killed, miraculously turned the tables. First, he taught Blackhand a lesson with a sword that hurt to see, then followed up with a beautiful backstab. Everyone could see that the Great Chief was about to die. In this duel, Lothar had the last laugh. A few seconds later, the beastmen who seemed to have been choked by the neck suddenly became even more restless. No, this was no longer a restless, this was a complete riot. At first, none of the beastmen could accept the Great Chief's death. Why did the great and invincible Great Chieftain die at the hands of a weak human? Even if this human looked very agile, courageous, and heroic. Because of their blind worship of the Great Chief, none of the beastmen could accept it. However, the Great Chief's roar before his death gave all the beastmen a reason. The two sentences added up to, Orgrim, you traitor! Traitor? Why would Orgrim, who was so loyal to the Great Chief, become a traitor? Did Orgrim do something to the Great Chief? The beastmen's simple thinking circuits could not wrap their heads around it. But that was not important. Duque played the role of a facilitator. In the houses on both sides of the beastmen's gathering, someone suddenly shouted in beastman language, We are the Shadow Destroyers. At least a third of the beastmen present were stunned for a full second. When they came back to their senses, they immediately swung their axes and machetes at the Blackrock warriors beside them, especially Blackhand's personal guards. At the same time, a huge flaming cup appeared in Duque's hand. Duque threw the huge cup at the place where Blackhand's personal guards were the most concentrated. Immediately, A series of tragic cries rang out. King Lang and Bolivar were the most embarrassed. In any case, their expressions could be translated as, "Damn it, is this really a sign to throw a cup?" Nothing else mattered. What mattered was that Duque had sent a signal. In the surrounding rooms, nearly 100 people shouted in the Orc language, "Avenge Durotan!" Along with this shout, dozens of Frostwolf clan flags were raised in the houses next to them. At this moment, all the Beastmen warriors of the Blackstone tribe who were still in a daze just a moment ago understood. Why did the great chief lose? This must be Orgrim's doing. Everyone knew that Orgrim and the Frostwolf tribe's chieftain Durotan were sworn brothers who had gone through fire and water together. However, after passing through the door of darkness and arriving in this world, Durotan was exiled by his entire tribe because he opposed Gul'dan. From the looks of it, Durotan should be dead. This would explain why Orgrim would betray the great chief. It was because Orgrim wanted to take revenge for his best friend. Therefore, the warriors of the Blackrock clan were enraged. "Orgrim, you traitor! Have you forgotten the great chief's kindness? Orgrim, have you forgotten that the great chief sacrificed his own hands to help you fish up Doomhammer? Orgrim, you are not worthy of being a great beast man. Orgrim, you actually colluded with the humans to murder the great chief." The angry roar reached the sky, and it could be heard clearly from a few blocks away. This time, not only the Blackrock clan, but even the other clans who were looting and burning heard it. Orgrim was completely dumbfounded. His mind was filled with question marks. The matter of rebellion was an absolute secret. How did the humans know about the slogan of treason? How did the humans know that I betrayed because of Durotan's death? What method did the humans use to make the great chief think that he was the traitor in a duel? Orgrim's thoughts were in a mess. Yes, he was indeed prepared to rebel, but it was a beastman uprising. As long as he killed the Black Hand in the sacred Makara, no matter how dissatisfied the other clans were, Orgrim would still be a legal rebel. As long as he became the great chief, he could reasonably accuse Gul'dan of using demonic methods to poison the beastmen and wipe out the Shadow Council. The secret code of "We are the Shadow Destroyers" was only used after he became the great chief to suppress any Blackrock clan beastmen who disobeyed his orders. However, everything was a mess now. The great chief died under the swords of the humans in Makara because of his betrayal. His subordinates also decisively attacked the Black Hand's personal guards because of the secret code. The Frostwolf clan's flag pushed him and his subordinates to the opposite side of the entire clan. What is going on? Orgrim only felt that there was an invisible evil hand hiding behind him and viciously attacking him. Even if it wasn't sh*t, it would still be sh*t. There was no way he could explain it clearly. At this time, Duque shouted righteously in the Beastman language, "I don't know what the hell you Beastmen are doing, but the winner of Makara is our Anduin Lothar." It would have been better if Duque did not shout, but once he did, Orgrim actually felt a telepathic connection. This was an intuition that surpassed his rationality. Orgrim instinctively felt that this powerful and sinister young human mage, Duque, was the culprit of everything. Duque stopped him from attacking Storm Fortress. Duque burned down half of the Elven Forest, forcing the Horde to split up their forces. It was this Duke again, the mastermind behind this strange Makara from the beginning to the end. "Of course you have to remember me, because I will become your nightmare." Duque's words echoed in Orgrim's ears. Looking at the mysterious smile on Duque's face, Orgrim was certain that everything was King Duque's doing. Duke Marcus. Orgrim finally remembered Duque's name. As an old enemy, using hatred as a mark. But so what? Orgrim raised Hammer of Destruction and wanted to rush forward, but he realized that he was being attacked by two highly skilled Black Hand's personal guard captains. He would not be able to rush forward until he got rid of them. On the other side, Noxus had successfully cut off Black Hand's giant head. He held the head in one hand and rushed over with his sword in the other. Bolvar covered Lang and quickly retreated to Storm Harbor. Noxus' face was filled with endless joy. Did it work? Yes. Let's go. Chapter 191. Everyone at the scene knew the weight of the great chief's head in Lothar's hands. If King Lang had been defeated in the capital and fled to South Shore, no matter how many soldiers he had saved and how many people he had protected, Lang would still be a useless king in the eyes of the other 6 kings. This humiliation would follow Lang for the rest of his life, and it would even affect the young William. In the history, even if Lang had been assassinated, he was still the king who defended the country and the hero in the hearts of the people. Even if Lothar and William were despised everywhere, no one would blame Lang for his death. In this life, Lang had survived thanks to Duque's efforts. Since Duque had protected Lang from Garona's assassination, he would not let Lang die in battle for the sake of his reputation in Stormwind City. After Lang died, Stormwind lost its backbone. Now the situation was completely different. The Great Chief's head and the tribal Great Chief's battle flag that Lothar had asked the guards to pick up were enough to prove that Lang had been defeated with honor. The battle flag, which was decorated with the teeth of large beasts, was obviously different. Even if they had lost the capital, every Stormwind citizen could still go out and say to anyone, "Our great hero Lothar chopped off the tribal Great Chief's head." However, everything was orchestrated by Duque. Without Duque's orc connection, no one would have thought of using such a method to lure the Great Chief out. Even the most picky person could only give Duque a thumbs up. Lothar was indeed a hero, as he was able to kill the Great Chief, Black Hand, despite the huge disparity in strength and speed. Everyone knew that Duque was the real hero. "Give me the head." Duque waved his hand. Lothar tossed Black Hand's head to Duque as he ran. Chilling cold. Duque waved his hand, and an extremely cold aura instantly enveloped the head of the great tribal chief, who was spinning in midair. In the next moment, Magician's hand caught Black Hand's head, which was frozen in a transparent block of ice. The heavy work of moving the enemy leader's head was naturally done by the guards. "Take the head and the flag and leave first. I'll bring the first squad to cover our retreat." Lothar did not let down his guard. He put on a shield and led the troops to retreat cautiously. In fact, Noxus was worrying too much. The orcs were already fighting amongst themselves and didn't have the time to pay attention to the retreating humans. At the dock, General Tom Seamus was burning with anxiety when he saw Lang's war flag and the royal guards at the city gate of Storm Harbor. He hurriedly led his troops to meet them. "Your Majesty, your safety is more important than anything else." General Seamus was so emotional that he was about to cry. "You've worked hard, my dear subject. Now only the last 2 steps are left." Lang stared at the squad of guards who were carrying the great tribal chief's head and the tribe's war flag, with obvious excitement in his eyes. Killing the commander and capturing the flag. If it weren't for Duque, he probably would have died here, wouldn't he? Infinite gratitude for Duque surged in Lang's chest. Thinking of the nobles who fled with their family properties at the time of disaster, Duque's name had already become sacred in Lang's heart. On the other side, when the troops led by Lothar were almost out of the church square, Duque finally launched a backup plan. Ambrose Liza Magarov's. It was a long incantation. As Duque's incantation sounded, Lothar clearly sensed that something was changing in the air. Countless mysterious magic runes appeared under Duque's feet like ripples, spreading in all directions. Seeing that Duque had stopped chanting, and the magic waves around him had also calmed down, Lothar still couldn't help but ask, "What did you do? If you wanted to burn down Storm City, would you need such an exaggerated magic array?" Duque smiled mysteriously. "You will know soon." At the same time, the Blackstone clan orcs who were fighting each other felt a wave of fear in their hearts. It was purely an animal's instinct, just like how even a mouse would run away in the face of a disaster. At this moment, every orc in all the streets of Storm City, no matter what they were doing, forcibly stopped what they were doing. The ground under their feet made them tremble in fear. In the largest church in Storm City, accompanied by the ringing of the bell, every evening prayer hall would echo with the uniform sound of the priest's evening prayers night after night. Following the attack on Storm City, the bell for evening prayers had not been rung for a long time. Every priest was using holy healing spells to heal the injured, using their kind voices to comfort every frightened soul. However, at this moment, the church bell that had not been rung in the night for a long time rang. 3 short, 3 long. Another 3 short. This was the signal that they had agreed on. The members of the daredevils who had long given up hope of escaping and knew that they were going to die quickly moved. They might have crawled out of an abandoned attic, an inconspicuous closet, or a secret basement, dragging their broken bodies with all their might. They used flint stones to light torches and threw them on the things that had been prepared beforehand. Some of them were piles of firewood that had already been doused with oil. Some were piles of whale fat that had been piled up in the corner, and some were storerooms filled with dry straw. More importantly, in the hot summer, the brick and wood houses and the large amount of flammables that had been prepared beforehand made it very easy to start a fire. Storage banks, exchanges, residences, shops, mansions of the nobles, various government offices, hotels, and all the important and unimportant facilities, more than 1,000 fires were lit up. In the beginning, the orcs who had already dispersed did not care about the fire. Burning, killing, and looting were absolutely common for any big city that had fallen. A few years ago, when the orcs had taken over Shatrath city, they had done the same thing to the Drenii city. And the orcs were not interested in human houses at all. They preferred their own tents. The orcs did not even think of running out to take a look, let alone putting out the fire. But soon they found that they were wrong. The fire was out of control. A fear that they had experienced not long ago surged in their hearts again. They suddenly remembered the scene of Duque burning down most of the tribe's main camp by himself. That blazing fire, which could be called the flames of hell, caused the deaths of over 10,000 orcs. They began to run out, trying to use all kinds of methods to put out the fire, but it was too late. The fire had already spread and scrupulously everywhere. One block after another was easily swallowed by the raging fire. In the narrow streets, they could not find a place to hide from the fire. They could only run to the wide square, or jump into the moat that covered the whole of Storm City. They watched in shock as pillars of fire shot into the sky one after another. Chapter 192. The area of fire grew wider and wider. Looking down from the black sky, one would find that the entire city seemed to have been flooded. It was a torrent of raging flames. Beep beep la la la. Low houses, towering mansions, huge warehouses, and countless other houses that had been burned through collapse one after another. Along with the continuous rumbling, countless orcs who could not dodge in time were crushed to death by the brick and wood houses in the narrow streets. Ah! Fire! Run! The streets and main roads had already been sealed off by the raging flames. At almost every important intersection, there were 2 large houses that had collapsed. The enormous burning towers just happened to block every path of escape. The orcs who had already hidden in the safe zone were trembling in fear, cold sweat dripping down their backs. They could only watch as their compatriots were devoured by the flames. Even if they covered their ears, they could still hear the screams and cries of their brethren as they burned the city. There was also the wild laughter of the human suicide squad before they lost their lives. Ha 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 ha. There was no regret, only the wild laughter of an enemy being killed. At that moment, the orcs realized that they had fallen into a common nightmare. That nightmare was named Duke Marcus. Once again, he burned countless orcs to death with his flames. Orgrim also jumped into the city's canal. Even though it was a hot summer day, the river water was still warm, but it did nothing to raise the temperature in his heart. This was an extremely painful trap for him, and he lost more than half of his men. If it weren't for the fire, perhaps even the remaining half of his body would have been killed by the crazy counterattack of the Black Hand Guards. He could no longer remember how many Black Hand Guards he had killed with his Hammer of Destruction. It was once a weapon that he was immensely proud of. He had used it to slay countless ogres and over 100 ferocious beasts in our world. But now, under the moonlight, the blood on the Hammer of Destruction flowed along the water of the canal. It was the blood of the Blackrock tribe, the blood of his fellow beastmen. However, Orgrim still had a strong sense of doubt and ominous premonition. He had a feeling that Duke Marcus, who was more devilish than the devil, had more tricks up his sleeves. Unknowingly, the moon was shrouded in dark clouds again. In the shining river, they saw a series of golden runes extending to the riverside like flames. That's impossible, Orgrim couldn't help but scream. Get to the shore. Quick. Otherwise it will be too late. Orgrim frantically called out to his men, his brethren. His subordinates obeyed. Even if they were a little unwilling, they still climbed up to the shore. Not far from the bluestone path along the riverbank was the city wall that had been roasted by the blazing flame street district until even the bricks had turned red. These 3-meter-high low walls, together with canals that could act as moats when necessary, divided Stormwind City into 6 large districts. Even though they were sitting on the bluestone by the riverbank, they could still feel the extreme heat. If it wasn't for Orgrim's roar, they would have sunk back into the cool water. In fact, many beastmen who were not directly under Orgrim had done so. They returned to the river and crossed the boundary between hell and the human world that the Grim Reaper had drawn with his scythe. It was as if there was a blazing sun rising from the depths of Stormwind City, arching the earth as if it would break through at any time. Countless golden runes glowed from the black soil beneath the canals. The beastmen in the river could clearly see their toes from the surface of the water. Asterisk rumble asterisk the entire Stormwind City shook. From King's Valley in the south to Stormwind Fort in the north, from the Mage District in the west to the Old City in the east, every street was shaking. The statue of Medivh that stood in the middle of King's Valley began to shake violently. Then, the statue that symbolized the guardian of the old era began to crumble. Every brick on the ground, along with the sand under them, rose and fell like waves, becoming more and more turbulent. Even the beastmen who were hiding from the flames on the ground were thrown into the air, dropped down, and then thrown up again. The wooden beams and pillars that were already starting to burn in the flames creaked and exploded one after another, speeding up the collapse of every house that had yet to collapse. Then the golden light shot out of the ground and into the bottom of the river. The streets and roads that were originally without flames became roads of flames. Every drop of water in the canals that were supposed to be shelters evaporated due to the high temperature. The beastmen who were still in the river were scalded to death in a few blinks of an eye, and the water turned into steam. The hot steam was even more lethal than the flames. The orcs couldn't suppress their breathing, so they inhaled a large amount of hot steam. The steam destroyed the alveoli in their lungs, making them feel like they weren't breathing air but fire. Even the beastmen, who climbed up to the riverbank, could not escape the fate of death. They only lingered on for a little longer than their brethren in the river, and then followed in the footsteps of their brethren. All the beastmen in Stormwind City screamed in agony, and then everything returned to silence. In the city, there was only the crackling of the raging flames, and the crackling of pillars, bricks, and glass falling to the ground. Other than that, the entire city fell into a deathly silence. How many beastmen could survive? Not 1 in 100. The beastmen who ran out of the streets or jumped into the river were almost completely wiped out. Only a small number of beastmen, who were trapped in the fire, managed to escape the scythe of the death god. Orgrim did not die. With his high fire resistance, he managed to withstand the flames, but a lot of his hair was burned off. Climbing out of the fire that was no longer as hot, Orgrim saw the charred corpses that filled the streets and riverbed. Ah, Duke Marcus. He had never hated a person as much as he did now. Even when he received news of his best friend Durotan's death, Orgrim still controlled his emotions. But this time, only this time, Orgrim completely hated a human. He was the new guardian of Stormwind, Duque. Ah, I will kill you. I swear. Even if I have to chase you to the ends of hell, I will kill you. I will peel off every piece of your flesh. I will eat you alive. I will break every single bone in your body and crush them. I will woo. On the scorched ground, Orgrim knelt down dejectedly. It's over. The elites of the Blackrock clan were all burned to ashes. Even if there were still many Blackrock tribe members in the camp, they would no longer be the strongest tribe in the horde. Chapter 193. In Stormwind Port, separated by a city wall, tens of thousands of Stormwind Kingdom's elite soldiers witnessed the last scene of their beloved city. Flames rose from the ground and soared into the sky. The flames could be clearly seen from dozens of kilometers away. The fire lit up the entire night sky. Perhaps, from today onwards, Stormwind City would be known as Flame City. This is Lang couldn't help but ask as he watched Duque return under the escort of Lothar and his elite soldiers. This was definitely not something that could be achieved by ordinary arson. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be purgatory. Duque wiped the sweat off his forehead with the towel that Windsor handed him. This is the magical defense system that Medivh left behind. His original plan was to set up a magical formation similar to the firewall spell in every canal. This was to prevent enemies from invading and destroying all the streets at once. But I changed it a little. Changed, of course. Lang knew about the division of the different districts. Why were there canals and walls separating the districts of Stormwind City? It was so that they could resist. In fact, there were secret tunnels between the districts, so that even if parts of the districts were conquered, they could still use the secret tunnels to take back territory. Yes, I ordered the suicide squad to set the entire city on fire and block the streets to drive all the orcs into the rivers. Then, Duque didn't finish his sentence. Everyone present was smart. They immediately realized that this was a chain reaction. By driving the orcs away, they would gather them together and then exploit the enemy's psychological blind spots to turn the safest place into a real death zone. No one would have thought that the canals that could avoid being burned to death were the real killer moves. Suddenly, everyone felt lucky that Duque was one of them, killing the great chief of the Horde and burning 100,000 of the Horde's soldiers with a fire. This glorious achievement easily made the soldiers cheer. The cheers didn't last long. It was simple. Everyone's heart was still heavy. Tens of thousands of soldiers gathered at the Stormwind port. The huge square of the port became extremely crowded because there were as many as 50,000 people. In order to avoid being outflanked by the Horde, the goblins had detonated the explosives on the cliff closest to Storm Harbor. However, once the fire was extinguished, if the Horde attacked again, these 50,000 people would have nowhere to run. These were not ordinary recruits. Perhaps many of them were from the militia or local garrisons. The real regular army only made up about 60% of them. But they had one thing in common. These 50,000 people were all veterans who had experienced more than one war with the orcs. It was not an exaggeration to say that these 50,000 people were the essence of Stormwind. If these 50,000 people could evacuate safely, Lothar was confident that he could train an army of 200,000 people within a year with these 50,000 people as seeds. If all 50,000 people died here, Lothar was right to be worried. In history, Lothar fled in panic with only the Queen and Prince Rin, an orphan and a widow, and thousands of soldiers. As a result, they were under the control of other human kingdoms. But tonight, the so-called history had changed beyond recognition. Lothar combed his sweaty hair and patted Duque on the shoulder. All right, now it's time for you to perform. The 50,000 soldiers silently parted to the left and right like the tide, each of them in awe. The person who strode in front of them was the hero Duque. Many people felt that this excessively young man was a mystery. In just a year, he had risen rapidly and become an important minister in the kingdom. Not only did he have powerful magic power, unparalleled courage, and the wisdom of a top tactician, from taking in the Murloc Naga to expand the Pearl Sea route for Stormwind City, to raiding Karazhan and killing Sargeras, to setting fire to the Horde's army, and finally to burning the city. The name Duke Marcus had become a legend. Now, everyone was shocked when they thought that they were about to become a part of this unfinished legend. No one knew what Duque was going to do next, but everyone felt that Duque could do it. This was the sense of trust that was based on actual achievements. Duque had proven himself time and time again. Now, it was just another step in Duque's legend to climb to new heights. Under thousands of gazes, Duque walked onto the dock and towards the dark sea. On the sea, the wind was strong and the waves were strong. The only thing that could be confirmed was that there were no ships on the sea, not even a sampan. Duque had personally promised every high-ranking official of Stormwind City that he would evacuate these 50,000 soldiers safely. How would he evacuate? Is Great Wizard Duque going to open the portal? A knight with some knowledge asked his colleague in a low voice. Impossible. I've seen the wizard's portal. I heard that it's very unstable, And even the sky wizards can't teleport more than 10 people at once, another knight replied. It's not a portal. This time it was General Tom Seymour who spoke. Even the dark portal that attracted the orcs this time can't teleport more than 500 people at once. Not to mention 50,000 people. Unknowingly, Duque had already walked to the end of the dock. Amidst many people's exclamations, Duque seemed to have lost his footing and fallen into the sea from the stone dock. But the next step, Duque stepped on solid ground. Ice. It was actually ice. Incomparably cold air instantly spread from under Duque's feet, and in the blink of an eye, a large area was frozen. The huge waves that were rushing towards him froze in front of Duque. The surging seawater lost all its momentum, and quietly and obediently crawled in front of Duque, in a frozen state. The large area of the sea opposite the dock was completely frozen by Duque's cold air. Rapid avalanche. No, this was no longer just a simple, rapid avalanche. The ice shield on Duque's body expanded almost endlessly, and all the seawater that entered the cold shield was instantly frozen. At the same time, the ice tornado that kept spinning in the shield was like a grinder, grinding away all the ice spikes and icicles that were higher than the horizon. The crackling sound of ice shards grinding against each other could be heard continuously. As Duque walked out step by step, a huge floating ice that was getting bigger and bigger appeared in the sight of the 50,000 soldiers. It was a huge floating ice that was like an iceberg. The side of the dock was rectangular, and the floating ice near this side was at least 300 meters wide. And as Duque walked out step by step, the surface area of this huge floating ice continued to expand. From afar, it looked like an incomparably huge ice ship. What, 3-masted sailboats or 5-masted sailboats? In front of this gigantic floating ice ship, they were simply too weak. Even the aircraft carrier that Duque had before he transmigrated was just a tiny dot in front of this huge ice ship. Chapter 194. Heavens, how much magic does Duque have? Even though Duque had told him earlier, Lang was still in disbelief. Beside Lang, the last Morning Star court mage heaved a long sigh. Your Majesty, if it were me, I might only be able to support half the area. Lang, Anduin and Bolvar were visibly moved. Did this mean that Duque's magic far surpassed the standard of an average Morning Star mage? On the shore, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Looking at this huge piece of floating ice, everyone knew that this was the ark that would take them away. However, what if they stood on it for too long? Would they freeze to death? It was summer, and while it was great to play with the ice, the cold air it emitted made people cower. Everyone move aside. Windsor was already instructing Duque's private soldiers to work. A large number of people swarmed forward, spreading the large amount of hay that had been piled on the pier onto the ice. Not only did the hay block the cold air, it also prevented people from slipping on it. Apart from the hay, there was even a fence to prevent people from slipping out. The elite soldiers of the Storm Kingdom were completely dumbfounded by what they saw. Was this even possible? Ugh, it was indeed impressive and magical. Duque walked more than 500 meters, and after extending the ice to 600 meters he stopped. Looking at the pile of incomparably dim magical gems in his hands that had lost their magical glow, Duque could not help but laugh bitterly. If any of these high-grade magical gems were to flow out, it would attract the Dalajan's pharaoh, who were usually high and mighty, to come running over and snatch them like dogs. Any two of them could buy the loyalty of a sky mage. If the magical gems used tonight were used to bribe people, this would be the price of a Morning Star mage. Yes, Kel'Thuzad, who would become a great lich in the future and rely on the filthy demon king, was at this level. However, they had all been used by Duque to toy with. Duque did not feel that it was a pity. Human lives could never be measured with money. Leaving behind 50,000 elites was enough to have a major impact on the entire situation. Old Mai, you've worked hard to protect Stormwind all your life. Now that I've used your fortune to save so many people, you should thank me properly. Of course, Duque didn't have that much mana, but after he used up the mana gems that Medivh had left in Karazhan, he managed to accomplish this miracle. In order to prevent the ice from cracking, Duque used his unparalleled magic control to separate the ice into 3 layers. The top layer carried passengers, while the middle and lower layers were used to support the passengers. Finally stopping, Duque waved from afar and shouted, "Everyone come up." In the hazy night, the light blue light flickered, contrasting with the blood and flames that dyed Stormwind City red, forming a very magical, very unique and strange landscape. The cold air began to condense, and the light reflected from the surface of the ice formed an illusory scene. The magical beauty of the huge ice ship made everyone forget the sense of loss of the capital for a moment, and put their minds into this surreal dream. The 50,000 troops, under the command of various commanders, walked along the dock and boarded the ice ship in an orderly manner. The air rippled with the sound of whispers. Of course, the biggest topic of discussion was how they were going to move the huge ice ship. Is Duque going to create a few giant sails out of thin air? How is he going to control it? Lang asked Anduin softly. How would I know? Lothar rolled his eyes. Back then, Duque had suggested using the ice ship to transport the soldiers away during the secret discussion, which sounded very noble. But in reality, when it came down to it, no one had ever studied how to move such a huge ice ship. The senior executives only knew that without the last 50,000 elite troops, they wouldn't even be able to stall for time. If Duque could save all of them, it would be a waste of time. Even if the orc army was burned to ashes, Clayan and the others thought that they would just have to make a few more trips to transport as many as they could. They agreed to Duque's plan purely because there was no better way. Out of trust in Duque, no one asked carefully about the details. Then they ushered in the moment of a miracle. Duque took out a peculiar conch that was engraved with runes and blew into it. More than 10 seconds later, thousands of bubbles appeared on the surface of the sea. A group of something was emerging from the bottom of the sea. Even though everyone was mentally prepared, they were relieved when they saw the hilarious and huge eyeballs. Murlocs. Thousands of murlocs. They floated up from the bottom of the sea in a disorderly manner. Some places were simply crowded with murlocs, and there was no fear of falling into the sea at all. Some places were tens of square meters, and there was not a single murloc. The Naga arrived. The burly male Naga carried large bundles of ropes on his shoulders and quickly climbed onto the ice. The ropes were tied with sharp grappling hooks. The male Naga chiseled these grappling hooks down and fixed them on the ice. At this time the Naga priestess Vara came. She still crossed her 4 crystal arms and bowed, but this time her head was lower. Great Master, Vara Ferlin Elvis is at your command. Duque waved his hand. Let's go. The male Naga held a giant hammer and smashed it hard at the connection between the dock and the ice ship. Not long after, there was a loud clatter, and the last connection between the ice ship and the land was separated. Vara's 2 right arms pointed to the dark distance and made a sharp and majestic voice. Jalalalajuo. You lowly murlocs, for the great lord of the ocean, get more people, pull the ship. Like a tug of war, nearly 100 murlocs pulled a rope and pulled with all their might. Thousands of splashes suddenly rose on the surface of the sea. At first, it was very slow, but it finally began to feel like it was moving. In the distance, in the darkness of the night, the blurry mountains and the torch-like Stormwind City seemed to have moved. Everyone knew that it was not Stormwind City or Stormwind Port that moved, but the ice ship under their feet. The soldiers, who were still in shock, finally reacted. Woo woo woo, the veterans cried. Some of them had lived in Stormwind City since they were born. Not only them, but their fathers, grandfathers, and many generations of ancestors had all lived in Stormwind City. Now, even if it was a glorious retreat, they still could not suppress the disappointment in their hearts. Before, their lives were uncertain, but now that they were finally sure that they were safe, they finally did not need to control their feelings. Woo woo woo, wails sounded in the team. Under the siege of hundreds of thousands of ferocious orcs that could fight 10 against 1, heavily injuring the enemy and then retreating. This was a myth for the soldiers of Stormwind City, but for the militia, garrison, and even civilians who were not soldiers not long ago, it was a fairy tale, a magical fairy tale. Chapter 195. On the surface of the ice, a loud and clear song echoed. With the glory of Thoradin the Great, we rushed to the south, and planted the blue lion flag on the King's Valley. That is the symbol of humanity's great legacy. We put our fate in your hands, the golden lion flag. Ah, the golden lion. You are the symbol of dignity and nobility. You are the knight that symbolizes honor. Ah, Stormwind City. You are the fortress of pioneers, the bridgehead of humanity's civilization. No matter what enemy it is, you can defeat it. This song was originally an unknown tune from 1,000 years ago. But unknowingly, it became one of the military songs of Stormwind, and would be played during every break of military training. But now that it was sung by the warriors who had lost their country, there was an additional sense of sorrow and sorrow. To every warrior of Stormwind, only when they had truly taken back Stormwind City and reclaimed the Elven Forest would they be worthy of this military song. After more than half a year of suffering, the journey was full of bitterness. The warriors of Stormwind used their blood and tears to water every inch of land from the Red Ridge Mountains to the Elven Forest, and then to Stormwind City. Some lost their houses and fields. Some lost their best friends of many years. Some lost their wives and children. And what was worse was that they had lost their own capital. From now on, they were just stray dogs in the eyes of others. But no matter how strong the orcs were, they were not depressed. Because they had a great King Lang who had accompanied them until the very end. They had a great commander, Anduin, who was always encouraging them and leading them. They also had a great hero who had mysterious abilities and created one miracle after another. Duque. Tonight, all the suffering had temporarily come to an end. From the next dawn, they firmly believed that under the leadership of these heroes, they would finally win the war against the orcs. Sir Marcus, thank you. You are our benefactor, our hope. Thank you, I can finally live to see my wife and children. As Stormwind City disappeared into the horizon, the soldiers began to shout excitedly after surviving a disaster. The further away they were from Stormwind City, the more intense the flames were. If the sound at the beginning was just a trickle of spring water in the dense forest, then by the end, it had become a surging ocean. The sound waves were like huge waves set off by a hurricane, assaulting one's face. Duque, Lang, Bolvar, and the other higher-ups of the storm stood side by side at the front of the ice ship. It was at this moment that they truly understood what it meant to be a tsunami. When 50,000 people crowded together and raised their swords to cheer and salute, the shocking scene was definitely unforgettable. It was not a military parade, nor was it an act on the scene, but a sincere expression of gratitude. King Lang smiled. Duque, make a platform for the soldiers to see you. Duque was a little embarrassed. He was in the limelight, wasn't he? Your Majesty, this. Lang smiled as he patted the huge block of ice that had frozen Black Hand's head. He then looked at the huge tribal flag and said, "These two things are enough for me. Besides, I've never cared about the reputation of a true hero being above mine. You see, I've never been the most famous person in the military." Lang was incomparably magnanimous. Anduin also egged Duque on. "Young man, Lang is preparing to make you do hard labor. If you don't go collect some interest first, I'm afraid you'll be miserable for a long time." Bolvar also smiled and nodded at Duque. Duque no longer hesitated. A huge ice prism beneath his feet lifted Duque straight up. Seeing Duque's robed figure, a huge wave of cheers rose into the sky. All of a sudden, the dark clouds dispersed, and the tranquil moonlight shone on the surface of the ice. It was as if the moon had heard the cheers and sneakily poked its head out to take a look. Long live Duke Marcus. Long live the great guardian of the storm. It was no exaggeration to say that Duque's blood was boiling at this moment. He suddenly felt that all the hard work and preparation he had put in for so long was all worth it. At this moment, the system notification sounded. "Congratulations, host. Your reputation in Stormwind has been permanently fixed at worship. Even if you lose all your integrity in the future, the people of Stormwind will still believe you unconditionally. In that case, your integrity will be seen as a hypocritical state." Hypocritical state? What the hell was that? Duque did not have time to think too much. He came down after receiving 3 waves of cheers from the soldiers. Anduin then asked, "What do we do next? Your merfolk are going to drag us to South Shore just like that?" Duque could not help but laugh. "How is that possible? It's not easy to maintain this big ice ship, and the waves in the deep sea will be a problem. It's summer now, and the high temperature will easily melt the ice." Bolvar's expression turned a little ugly. "Damn it, we have almost no food and water. If the ice melts, won't it?" Bolvar had already imagined the tragic scene of a group of people wearing armor and sinking straight into the sea. Duque took out a simple sea map and pointed to an island opposite Stormwind City. "Our destination is here." The ice ship arrived at its destination early the next morning. It was a small island that was only 5 square kilometers in size. The biggest feature of the island was that it had a freshwater spring. The sea merchants who traveled between Stormwind City and Coltiras all knew of this nameless island. When there was a shortage of drinking water, most would choose to stop here to replenish their water. And now there was enough bread to feed 50,000 people for half a month. The soldiers once again burst into fiery cheers when they stepped on land. Duque shrugged. "All right, the next step is to wait for the fleet to send us to South Shore." Under the shade of a few trees, the higher-ups of Stormwind began to discuss the future policies of the kingdom. "I plan to make a trip to Rotterdam. I want to unite all the human kingdoms, as well as the dwarves and high elves, to form a huge alliance to fight against the orcs' invasion." Clayan revealed the plan that he had been thinking about for a long time. Rotterdam was located in the northeast of the Eastern Kingdom. It was the home that the Rotterdam Kingdom was most proud of. In fact, at this point in time, the Rotterdam Kingdom was the most powerful among the 7 human kingdoms. The rich Rotterdam Kingdom had the widest fields and the largest population among the 7 kingdoms. There was a saying that went, "I'd rather be a baron in Rotterdam than an earl in Torrential Fortress." This mentality was a good reflection of the richness of the land. "Should I stay in South Shore to train the troops?" Anduin asked. "No, you should follow His Majesty to Rotterdam." Duque rejected Lothar's suggestion. Chapter 196. Why? Lothar was puzzled. In his opinion, as the highest military commander of the kingdom, he should be with his soldiers. The 7 kingdoms need a reason to work together. Duque's answer enlightened everyone. Yes, the Arathar Empire, being of the same race, of the same origin, and of the same clan, especially in front of a great enemy, was the best reason to unite. Moreover, there was no deep hatred between the 7 kingdoms. Abandoning the son of Thoradin the Great was indeed unkind, but they did not fight against each other. Hence, Lothar's identity as Thoradin's son was very important. "Your Majesty, It was difficult for Anduin to deal with such a sensitive issue. Don't worry. After all, it was your ancestor who gave up the throne to my ancestor." In the eyes of outsiders, there was indeed a suspicion of usurpation. However, when it came to matters that concerned all of humanity, and even the world of Azeroth, such trifles were nothing. The training of the troops can be left to Bolvar. Anduin thought for a while and nodded. At the end of the day, Lang, Anduin, and Bolvar were all very upright people. Without the restriction of those annoying nobles, they could exert their full strength. "Bolvar, I'll leave the training of the troops, my queen, and Varian to you." Lang did not have many capable subordinates. Some of the nobles who were originally in high positions had either become demons or been slaughtered by the demons in the middle of the sea. This was almost equivalent to the position of an assistant minister, and was definitely the highest of the highest. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Bolvar bowed deeply. Lang turned to look at Duque. He took a deep breath, and with a wave of his hand, a servant handed him a small spoon of melted wax. Another servant handed him a document, opened it, and poured the wax on it. Then, Lang took out the royal seal from his arms and stamped it heavily on the wax. This is Duque glanced at it and saw his own name. King Lang turned his head and smiled at Duque. "Duke Marcus, please kneel." "Yes. Fine. The boss had given me an empty promise, so I'll just kneel then." "Duke Marcus, in order to thank you for your great achievements, as well as to commend your loyalty, bravery, and wisdom, I now confer you the title of Duke of Stormwind." You are allowed to have twice the private army of a normal duke. Your fief consists of the following: Eastvale Lumberyard in the north, Karazhan in the south, Mistmantle Manor in the west, and Triangle Junction in the east. I know that there are many places that have fallen to the orcs, but I believe that one day we, the Stormwind, will reclaim this beautiful and fertile land. He thought it was over, but who knew it wasn't? You will be the commander-in-chief of the Stormwind Navy. You will be in charge of all naval ships, and you will be allowed to recruit no more than 1/5 of the Navy's total forces. Duque was visibly moved. The private armies of the nobles in Stormwind were strictly limited by class. Dukes were not allowed to have more than 5,000 men. Twice that was 10,000. This was a legal military force that could be put on the table. As for the fief, no one knew better than Duque how powerful Stormwind was later in the history. Because the other human kingdoms had either fallen or declined, Stormwind City had become the greatest benchmark for the human race. Stormwind absorbed a large number of refugees from the north, and the speed at which its soldiers grew was even more exaggerated than the undead scourge. Indeed, the Headwind Trail had been blown to smithereens by Mediva's big explosion. But Eastvale Lumberyard and other rich lands in Elven Forest were definitely first-class fiefs. And as the commander-in-chief of the Navy, there was no doubt that the whole of Stormwind, and the benefits derived from the sea, were all given to Duque. Everyone knew that now that Stormwind had almost completely fallen, and it was only a matter of time before the western wilderness was completely destroyed. If Stormwind wanted to continue, it had to rely on Duque. However, it was rare for someone like Clayan to have such boldness. Without hesitation, Duque bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your gift." Lang smiled and finally sighed. "What gift? If it wasn't for you, even if Stormwind was not completely destroyed, I'm afraid only tens of thousands of people would have escaped. Maybe even I would have died in Stormwind. I'm the one who feels guilty for making these empty promises." "Your Majesty, you've done very well." Anduin and the other officials comforted Lang. "Sigh. The resettlement of nearly 600,000 soldiers is a headache just thinking about it. But we don't have anything. If that doesn't work, try to ask other countries to take in our people." "Right. No money. No food. How could they survive?" Anduin and the others looked at each other dumbfounded. In times of crisis, they only thought about saving people's lives and saving them first. Now that they had saved them, they were dumbfounded. They had to eat, drink, and go to the toilet. If it was only tens of thousands of people, they might be able to beg the other countries. But there were 600,000 people here. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Yet, when he escaped, he didn't bring anything with him other than his weapons. Not to mention that Duke Ferens, who was in charge of internal affairs, was dead. Even if he was not dead, he would probably be scared to death on the spot. "Duque, can I trouble you to go to Alterac, Rapids Castle, and the Dalajan to negotiate with the heads of the countries? Also, our national treasury is finished. I wonder if you can lend a sum of money to the kingdom in your own name." Lang's face was flushed when he said this. On one hand, he really did not have any talented people around him. Bolvar and the others were indeed righteous knights, but they were definitely not good at diplomacy. Moreover, if they were to go begging like beggars, it would be strange if the other side would have a good expression. On the other hand, a dignified king actually had to borrow money from a duke. What face did he have? And the richest person here was Duque. "Your Majesty, please do not worry about the national treasury." With that, Duque snapped his fingers, and two burly male Nagas carried a huge box out of the sea. The royal guards took the box and opened it. A burst of golden light almost blinded Lang and the other poor people's eyes. Gold bars. So many gold bars. These gold bars were engraved with the emblem of a lion. It was no doubt the gold bars used in Stormwind. "These are..." Lang stuttered. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten? A while ago, when those nobles were escaping, they encountered the Bloodsail pirates. In order to escape, their ship turned and left behind a large amount of their belongings. Then my Murlocs picked them up." Lang suddenly remembered that because those nobles had colluded with the demons, they had been demoted. According to the kingdom's laws, their fiefs and properties would be confiscated. At this moment, Anduin, Bolvar, and the royal guards all bowed to Duque. Duke Marcus, you have a heart that shines with a holy light. Chapter 197. Honesty, courage, wisdom, and loyalty. Duque had become a synonym for a saint in everyone's hearts. In reality, other than his smarts as a transmigrator, Duque's other three qualities were all bullsh*t. Duque had never thought that he had ever been loyal to Lang. As a modern man, deep in his bones he was a boss and a worker. Duke would never be touched by the feeling of sacrificing his life for the other party. As a transmigrator who was familiar with history, Duque knew that money was not enough, but having too much money was useless. The most important thing was still power. His own power, and the power of his subordinates. According to history, the First Orc War ended with the opening of the Dark Portal and the fall of Stormwind City. Then, the Orc army regrouped and headed north, looking for trouble with all the races and kingdoms on the continent. This was the start of the Second Orc War. Duque did not know if the Orcs would continue to go against all the races and factions on the continent like they did in history. Obviously, when Duque saw that the world of Azeroth's similarity had dropped from 80% to 79%, Duque realized that history would continue to be shockingly similar. Duke had saved 50,000 elite soldiers, as well as Leon, who hadn't died in history. Of course, Khadgar had died as well. He had killed over 100,000 Beastman elite soldiers, and had even ruthlessly tricked Orgrim. Even with so much fate deviation, he had only managed to reduce the similarity by 1%. Just thinking about it made one drunk. However, when he thought about the mighty Burning Legion and the creation titans that would appear later on, he suddenly felt that it was quite amazing that he had done so much in exchange for 1% of the world's change. Alright, back to reality. At noon on the second day, the first batch of ships arrived. This batch of ships had more than enough space. After replenishing some daily necessities and medicine for the people waiting on the island, they carried a total of 16,000 people. On the ship, Duque was already busy. Because the tribe did not pay much attention to the western wilderness, Duque was able to secretly transport the summer grain that had not yet been sent to Stormwind City to South Shore. This batch of grain could greatly alleviate the food shortage in South Shore. In addition, there was the migration of the Murlocs and Nagas. In fact, the Orcs couldn't do anything to the Murlocs on the coast, but Duque needed the Murlocs more South Shore. The entire continent of the Eastern Kingdom was actually divided into two continents, the North and the South, connected by a gigantic solder bridge. To the south of the southern continent was the territory of Stormwind, while to the north of the southern continent was the territory of the dwarves centered around Ironforge. To the southeast of the northern continent was the Earthy Highlands, which was where the Stromgard Kingdom was located. To the south was the Hillsbrad Hills, the territory of the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms, the Alterac Kingdom. The place where the refugees of Stormwind City were evacuated was South Shore, which was located south of the Hillsbrad Hills by the sea. To the west of the northern continent was the Magic Kingdom of Dalagen, and to the north was the most powerful Lordaeron Kingdom. Of course, the northernmost part of the northern continent was the High Elves Kuel Salis Kingdom. Now, Duque was moving the Murlocs because Duque needed the Murlocs to help reclaim the Murlocs there, and to fish as much as possible to provide fish for the Stormwind refugees. About 50,000 of the Stormwind refugees were taken in by the maritime kingdom of Kul Tiras, while 100,000 continued to move in the direction of Stromgard, Alterac, Dalagen, and even Lordaeron. Including the 50,000 soldiers who were about to arrive, there were less than 450,000 people left in South Shore. Even so, it was a very heavy burden. Through the system Elf, Duque had already calculated that even if they found enough land to cultivate, they would still be short of at least 20,000 tons of food before the first harvest next year. In this era, it was almost an astronomical figure. It completely exceeded the amount of food that could be bought in the commercial market. Lang was running away from reality, and threw the food problem onto Duque's head. This made Duque's teeth hurt. He had a lot of things to do, such as finding time to go to the southernmost Stranglethorn Valley of the Eastern Kingdom to deal with the remaining Bloodsail pirates, or finding time to practice magic. After much consideration, Duque decided to pay a visit to the Bearer family in Alterac. Many people might wonder why Duque didn't visit the king of Alterac Kingdom, but the Bearer family instead. It had to start from the history of the Alterac Kingdom. The Alterac Kingdom had a long history, but the current royal family's history was very short. It only lasted for the past 20 years. The first king of Alterac was born into a wealthy family, and in order to have a place of his own, he founded the Alterac Kingdom. He chose to build his kingdom on the steep Alterac mountain range. The land was barren, and the living conditions were terrible. Very few people were willing to follow him, and the kingdom's territory and power were very small. It was not an exaggeration to say that Alterac Kingdom was the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms. The current king, Aidan Pirinold, inherited this mess, and the situation only improved after the Bearer family joined in. The Bearer family of the Alterac Kingdom was a wealthy family that controlled a large amount of land east of the Alterac mountain range. Brill Terran Mill Cerdero South Shore. These places were all their fiefdoms. Their wealth surpassed that of the Alterac royal family. They had earthy blood, and the family lived in Cerdero County, which was an old castle of the earthy people. They continued this ancient and noble family bloodline. In fact, the Bearer family was the one that Duque had been dealing with. From the very beginning, Duque had never set his sights on the other factions to get the food. The transportation of food in this era was terrible. Even the slightest bit of distance would result in a 50% loss of food. The only thing that Duque felt lucky about was that most families had the habit of storing food, because the harvest was not stable. As long as he could settle the rich Bearer family, he would not have to worry about food until next year. A week later, Lang and Duque's group arrived at South Shore. Ryan was very surprised by the expanded South Shore. There was a stone pier built according to the standards of Stormwind City, and there were neat wooden houses, as far as the eye could see from the entrance of South Shore. There were medical, food, fire protection, toilets, and all kinds of living facilities available. There was even a huge wooden wall being built. But after comforting the people, Lang hurried on the road to Lordaeron. Duque left Windsor to help him train his private army, while he brought Makarov and the others to Cerdero County to meet Alex Barov, Aidan's best friend, and now Duke Barov. Chapter 198. Just as Duque arrived at South Shore and was about to visit the Barov family, something huge happened in the tribe. Judgment. Traitor. Orgrim. You disgrace to the beastmen. Hey wolf. Hey wolf. Hey wolf. The clamor filled the entire camp. Every tribal warrior's eyes were bloodshot because of anger. Their necks seemed to be stuffed with 2 dicks thick and red. They opened their mouths full of fangs and roared at the top of their lungs. At the center of the hall was Orgrim, who was kneeling on both knees. He was once the assistant of the great chief, but now he was a traitor in the eyes of the beastmen. The horn that was used to summon the great chief was still sounding. It sounded as though it was mourning the death of the great chief, but it also seemed like it was trying to awaken the anger in the beastmen's hearts. Countless pebbles of all sizes were thrown at Orgrim, who was kneeling on the ground. These stones were the size of a human fist, and when they hit Orgrim's face, they were not fatal, but they were painful. However, the physical pain could not surpass the pain in his heart. It was the pain of losing 100,000 elites. It was the pain of the unknown fate of the beastmen. It was the pain of knowing that Gul'dan would lead the beastmen to destruction once he returned. Orgrim's mind was still replaying the scene of that day. His good friend Doroten's smile was still echoing in his mind. That day Doroten came. He told the Hammer of Destruction everything he knew. The contract with the Demon Lord, the origin of Gul'dan's power, and the betrayal of the clans under the control of the Shadow Council. The final and humiliating end that awaited the beastmen was that they would be thrown as bait to the demons of the Burning Legion. As Orgrim listened, he tried his best to keep his wide face cold, making his aura and posture befitting of the assistant of the great chief. However, in his thick chest, his heart was beating violently, as though his famous hammer of destruction was beating on human flesh. Was this true? This sounded like a story spouted by an idiot who went through the dark portal and was messed up by the unknown energy in the void. Demons. Dark contract. What a joke. However, this was what Durotan had said. Durotan was not only the smartest, bravest, and most honorable chief of the tribe. He was also an old friend that Orgrim had trusted with his life more than once, and he had repaid Orgrim's trust with his greatness, courage, and integrity more than once. If these words were spoken by any other orc, Orgrim would definitely teach them a lesson with his hammer. If the one who said this was Durotan, then Orgrim's answer would be trustworthy. In the following days, Durotan paid the price for his integrity and loyalty to the tribe with his life. He and his wife Draka had been assassinated by the Shadow Council. Whenever he recalled this scene, Orgrim's steady hands would tremble uncontrollably. Orgrim couldn't help but ask himself, am I going to die? Should I die in such a cowardly manner as a traitor? No, there's a lot I haven't done yet. If I die like this, then no one will be able to control Gul'dan. This true traitor will lead the entire tribe into the abyss of death, and shamelessly sell the souls of all orcs to the demons. Thinking of this, Orgrim suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar. I am not a traitor. Orgrim's voice was so loud that it was like a clap of thunder. It actually suppressed the clamor of the thousands of orcs present. Every orc's face froze. Their roars were suppressed into their throats, unable to come out. If you're not a traitor, then who is? A deep voice rang out. This voice had an inhuman coldness to it, as though the owner of this voice was temperamental. Kilrog Deadeye, the chief of the Bloodloop tribe. Due to the unexpected death of the chief, he had no choice but to temporarily hand over the army to his deputy and lead his personal guards back. With the Blackrock tribe suffering heavy losses, the authority of the Bloodloop tribe had undoubtedly increased. Among the chiefs of the dozens of tribes present, his authority could be ranked in the top 3. Orgrim stood up proudly and fearlessly looked Kilrog's remaining eye in the eye. For a moment, Orgrim's words were on the tip of his tongue. He almost said Gul'dan is a traitor. But at this moment Duke's face, which always had a mysterious smile on it, appeared in Orgrim's mind. Duke Marcus, the most powerful human mage, the most cunning strategist. He was the one who orchestrated all of this. He was the one who put the 100,000 orcs to death. He was the one who killed the chief. If not for him, perhaps the orcs would have had to put in more effort, but they definitely wouldn't have won such a Pyrrhic victory. Orgrim also had an even clearer understanding. The only person who could deal with the existence of the mystical realm was Gul'dan, who was also a mystical. Whether it was him or the other chiefs, they couldn't do anything to Duke. Thinking of this, Orgrim forcefully swallowed his words, and instead let out a maniacal laugh. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Kilrog, you make me feel like a joke. Why do you think I'm a traitor who killed 100,000 of my own people for the sake of the humans? Why would you rather believe the lies of the humans than the loyalty of a orc? Why would you believe a despicable mage who set fire to us orcs again and again? Orgrim's rebuttal stunned the chieftains and the thousands of leaders around him. Orgrim's direct accusation that the arsonist was Duke was not wrong at all. Grom Hellscream roared as he strode forward. Then how do you explain the fact that more than one orc who survived in the area testified that the chief called you a traitor before he died? Also, why would your people attack the chief's personal guards? Don't you think that suddenly going crazy and attacking your own people is very familiar? It had to be said that Orgrim had the talent to win the Best Actor award. Yes, this scene was very familiar. It was the scene where the orc warlock used the art of fear on the human soldiers. You said Gul'dan betrayed us. Grom frowned. I didn't say that. But you might have noticed that the humans' tactics and equipment have been improving, so it's not impossible for them to obtain the power of a warlock. The orc chiefs fell into deep thought. At this time, Kilrog Deadeye stood in front of Orgrim again. My Deadeye tells me that you shouldn't die here as a traitor. I also know that you are one of the wisest orc warriors, And you also have the ambition to become the chief. I can give you a chance to prove yourself, as long as you join Bagash. Orgrim's heart beat violently, almost jumping out of his chest. Chapter 199. Even Duque didn't know that because he had tricked Orgrim, it had caused Orgrim to invoke a ritual that had never appeared in any history, Bagash. This was a ritual for orcs who were suspected of being traitors, to prove their reputation. The ritual was very simple, violent, and bloody. That was, under the witness of at least 100 orc warriors, 7 recognized warriors would stab 7 daggers into the body of the ritual participant. The daggers couldn't cause fatal wounds, they couldn't injure the tendons or bones, and they couldn't injure the internal organs. Then, the participant would have to fight a duel to the death with a recognized warrior, usually a tribe chief, while having 7 daggers stabbed into their body. Only by winning the duel would the participant be considered to be cleared of suspicion, and their reputation restored. No one knew why Kilrogg would suggest letting Orgrim participate in Bagash. If one had to force a reason on Kilrogg, it would be his dead eye that could no longer see. Kilrogg was born into the Bloodring clan of Draenor. When his clan was about to be exterminated by the Crowmen, Kilrogg unwillingly bowed his head and admitted defeat. Under the arrangements of his sickly father, he followed the clan's ancient tradition. He found the hidden chamber that was named after his clan, and carried out the terrifying ritual of sacrificing his left eye in exchange for seeing his future. In the ritual, Kilrogg foresaw that his death was still far away, so he knew that he would survive this disaster. Encouraged by his destiny, he seized control of the clan, and led the Bloodring clan to crush the threat of the Crowmen. Then he won countless battles. In the following years, he slaughtered any dissidents, and even his closest kin couldn't escape the death penalty. He had always hoped that his destiny would come to him step by step. Although orcs were rude and unreasonable, most of them were superstitious. In the current situation where there were no shamans in the tribe's camp, Kilrogg's deadeye became quite convincing. Without hesitation, Grom Hellscream, Samuro, and the other high-ranking warriors all agreed to Kilrogg's proposal. Orgrim Doomhammer, are you going to accept Bagash in order to prove your innocence? Gilrogg's voice was cold, but it also carried a kind of sharp pressure. It was a terrifying aura that only a warrior who had walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood would have. He was old, but no one could deny that he was still one of the strongest warriors in the tribe. I accept. Orgrim stood under the doubtful gazes of countless orcs. Not only do I accept it, but I also request that when you accept Bagash, you also activate Makara. Hiss! Countless orcs sucked in a breath of cold air. This meant that Orgrim had to accept challenges from at least 7 chieftain-level warriors, while being stabbed 7 times. He could only stop when there were no more challengers. Of course, if Orgrim succeeded, he would become the second great chief of the Horde after Blackhand. Every orc's broad face was filled with unconcealable shock. Either Orgrim was a madman, or he would become the strongest warrior in the history of the Horde. Come! Orgrim suddenly hammered his chest, creating a loud bang. Gilrogg didn't say a word. He pulled out a long, curved bone dagger. This bone dagger was at least 30 centimeters long. A white light flashed, and the entire dagger was stabbed diagonally into Orgrim's left collarbone. It pierced through Orgrim's muscles that were as thick as city walls, and came out from the back of his left shoulder blade. Blood splattered everywhere. It was a ghastly sight. Phew! Orgrim didn't even groan in pain. He merely clenched his fists. Gromhell roared and charged forward. His face was expressionless as he pierced through Orgrim's right arm with his dagger, only avoiding the tendons and bones. Ugh! Orgrim let out a low groan. Swordmaster Samuro of the Fireblade clan followed behind, and pierced Orgrim's right thigh with his dagger. Then the 4th, 5th, and 7th warrior went up. Every one of them left a dagger on Orgrim's body. At this moment, Orgrim had become a hedgehog covered in blood. Who is willing to use Orgrim Doomhammer's life to prove their bravery? Who is willing to obtain this Doomhammer fair and square? Orgrim's roar was as loud as a bell, and it reverberated in all directions. Not many beastmen would be willing to kill a beastman, who might be dishonorable, unless they could obtain real benefits from him. Coincidentally, Orgrim had it. Not many beastmen could resist the temptation of Doomhammer, especially after Orgrim used it to kill no less than 500 warriors of various races. Ogres, giant lizards, land dragons, and human army commanders. Orgrim used his illustrious battle records to indirectly prove the power of this hammer. Suddenly, a flag was thrown into the middle of the field. I, Galil of the Shattered Sand clan, stake my honor to fight you. Looking at this opponent who was more than a head taller than him, Orgrim was a little disappointed. This was the chief of a small clan with only a few hundred people. But as a suspected traitor, he really couldn't ask for more. In the sky, rolling clouds surged. On the ground a horn sounded. Whether it was Makara or Bagash, nothing could attract the attention of the beastmen more than the bloodiest and most passionate battle. Only those who dared to face death would be recognized by the beastmen who valued martial arts. Only this most primitive and most unsophisticated battle could truly wash away Orgrim's suspicions. Come! Orgrim roared, and the little chief Galil rushed over. Bang! Bang! Galil's heavy footsteps could be heard on the solid ground. Galil's momentum gave people the illusion that a mountain was collapsing. Galil bared his teeth and slashed with his huge machete. It was powerful enough to cut Orgrim in half with one slash. But Orgrim's sharp eyes flashed with a hint of disappointment again. Weak. Too weak. Whether it was strength, speed, or skill, they all disappointed Orgrim. For some reason, he thought of Anduin Lothar, the human who had killed Blackhand the other day. He was clearly at a disadvantage in terms of speed and strength, but Lothar used his perfect unloading techniques and amazing footwork to fight evenly with the great chieftain. Looking at such an opponent, Orgrim didn't even want to wait a second longer. In the eyes of outsiders, he accidentally dropped the heavy hammer of destruction. Only those who knew the ropes could see that he didn't take Galil seriously at all. Just at the moment when the machete was about to fall, Orgrim suddenly exerted force with his intact left leg and rushed into Galil's arms. He punched the enemy's wrist that was holding the machete. The next second he suddenly clapped his hands. Galil's entire head was instantly smashed in the palm of his hand. It was like a watermelon smashed by a hammer. Orgrim looked up to the sky and shouted, "Next!" Chapter 200. His gigantic hands were stained with blood and colorful brain matter. Orgrim displayed the most primitive, most barbaric violence. The beastmen couldn't help but think of their ancestors. When they didn't have any weapons, they used their strong bodies, fists, teeth, and arms to fight against wild beasts. They struggled to survive in the desolate wilderness. Orgrim's most direct attack ignited the passion in every beastman's heart. Oh, Orgrim! Orgrim! Just a few minutes ago, these beastmen were still angrily cursing Orgrim. But a few minutes later, Orgrim, who displayed his bravery and power, immediately became the brightest star of the entire tribe. Kilrog Deadeye opened his seemingly turbid right eye and said slowly, "Orgrim Doomhammer, you have cleared your name and restored your reputation. Now if you want to leave Makara, it is not too late." Orgrim used his actions to answer. With blood-stained steps, he took down a flag from a tent at the side of the field. That was the flag of the Blackrock tribe that belonged to him, Doomhammer. With a swing of his hand, the red and black war flag landed in the middle of the field. I, Orgrim Doomhammer. From here on, Makara, I challenge for the position of Great Chief. I will accept challenges from at least 6 warriors, until I ascend to the position of Great Chief or death. Even though he was stabbed multiple times, even though every wound was still bleeding as Orgrim moved, Orgrim's soul-stirring roar still spread throughout the camp. Ho! 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 This was the rhythmic cheering of the beastmen. Nothing made their blood boil more than a blood-soaked warrior participating in the battle for the position of Great Chief. No matter how much they didn't want to admit it, it was an indisputable fact that the tribe had just won a Pyrrhic victory. The weak humans were far more cunning than the beastmen imagined. The entire tribe urgently needed a true king, who could lead the tribe to conquer this planet. The orcs shouted and praised loudly. They raised the crude weapons in their hands high and stomped the ground with both feet, as if they wanted the earth to tremble and let the earth cheer and welcome the possible new great chieftain that was about to appear. A clan flag with 3 teeth on it was thrown into the field. It was a Blade Fong clan with 1,000 warriors. As a small clan, the chief of Blade Fong clan, Ramlin, was not a very strong orc. Among the beastmen, he was definitely small and skinny. He made up for his lack of strength with his high agility. Orgrim, Ramlin roared loudly, but his movements were reminiscent of a nimble lynx. Ramlin aimed at Orgrim's injured right leg and moved at high speed with Orgrim's injured leg as the axis. Orgrim was indeed affected. The moment he turned around and couldn't keep up, Ramlin pounced on him. 2 cross scimitars flashed in the air, and Orgrim's broad back was instantly marked with a bloody red cross. His skin and flesh were torn open by the barbs on the scimitars. It was a ghastly sight. Just as Ramlin was about to retreat, Orgrim counterattacked. Under the sunlight, the heavy hammer of destruction shone with a black light as it spun. There was no technique involved, only speed. It was unbelievably fast. It was insanely fast. It was a speed that surpassed what Ramlin could capture with his naked eye. In less than a blink of an eye, his slightly slender body was split in half by a single powerful blow, as if he had been chopped by an incomparably huge machete. Time seemed to have frozen. Ramlin's chest and lower body were still floating in the air, but his abdomen that was hit instantly exploded into a rain of flesh and bone, exploding in the direction of the hammer's strike. After what seemed like 3 seconds, Ramlin's eyes, which were still filled with disbelief, fell into a pool of blood along with his eyeball. Killing with 1 strike, domineering. Next, Orgrim's loud voice was no different from a drum in the orc's ears. Another flag was thrown into the field. A minute later, another wound appeared on Orgrim's shoulder, and another corpse appeared on the ground. Next, it was the same killing with 1 strike, the same voice, and the same tone that never changed. But with the corpses of the 3 tribal chiefs as the foundation, Orgrim's shout had a different meaning. The tribal chiefs who thought that they were the weaker ones replied with silence. At this moment, there was no longer any hope in their hearts. Even though the orcs who were watching were all fired up, there was a short silence among the people who were qualified to participate in Makegara. Half a minute later, the 4th flag was thrown. 3 minutes later, the 5th flag. 10 minutes later, the 6th flag. By the time the 7th flag was thrown into the arena, Orgrim was already covered in blood. No one could tell if it was Orgrim's blood or his enemies. None of the 6 tribal chiefs had a complete corpse. All of them had turned into bloody chunks of flesh. From an unknown little chieftain to the chieftain of a clan with tens of thousands of people, the challengers were leveling up step by step, and Orgrim's injuries were worsening as well. Now anyone who went up had to weigh their own strength first. When the 7th flag was thrown, a black-skinned orc without a left hand came out. Below his left arm was a long scimitar. It was not because he lost his left hand in the war, but because he was a warrior of the Broken Palm tribe. As one of the cruelest and fiercest tribes in the tribe, the Broken Palm tribe's tradition was to cripple their left hand and replace it with a sharp blade. They were prepared to go through fire and water for the tribe's glory. Orgrim, you are indeed powerful, but your path as a great tribal chief will end with me, Cunnud Bladefist. The tribes were also divided into different ranks. Only the tribal chiefs had the right to challenge, but in the big tribes, the publicly recognized warriors also had the right to challenge Makegara. For example, in the history, Orgrim challenged Black Hand as the deputy of the Blackrock tribe's chief. This was equivalent to the deputy chief, and he successfully killed Black Hand. Glancing at Cunnud Bladefist, Orgrim's boorish face showed some disdain. If you can't do it, let your chief Kargath do it. Humph. You are tired. You are heavily injured. Orgrim. Cunnud suddenly took a step forward. With your temperament, you are only fit to take advantage of heavily injured opponents. The mockery on Orgrim's face intensified. Yes, I am tired. I am injured. But even if there are 1,000 of you, I can still kill them all. Chapter 201. The crowd had thought that they had reached the peak a long time ago. But who would have thought that after Orgrim's words, an even higher peak, that seemed to have appeared out of thin air behind that unsurpassable peak. The sound waves reverberated in the sky for hundreds and thousands of times. The entire tribe's camp, and even the entire land, were shaking violently. What kind of heroic spirit was this? As long as one's life was not spared, the bloody battle would not end. Not long ago, no one looked favorably upon Orgrim, the assistant of Black Hand. But now, every single beastman had a different view of him. His gaze was filled with intense admiration. No, this was no longer admiration, it was worship. Orgrim! Orgrim! The roars of thousands of beastmen stirred up the emotions of all the beastmen in the tribe's camp. Although the beastmen in the distance could not see what was happening, they could hear their leader's voice and knew that perhaps a new great chieftain was about to be born. Cunnud pounced over. Orgrim said that he looked down on Cunnud, but in his heart, he put in 120% of his effort. No one from the Broken Palm clan was easy to provoke. The Broken Palm clan originated from the beastmen, who were enslaved by the ogres. This group of beastmen were imprisoned by the ogres in a huge, rough, and incomparably sturdy circular arena as gladiators. Every day, they would fight nonstop to entertain the ogres and other higher races. This was the sole purpose of these beastman gladiators' existence. The ogres promised that as long as any beastman slave killed 100 beastmen in the arena, they would obtain freedom. Cunnud's brother, Kargith Bladefist, did it. However, what the ogres gave Kargith was not freedom, but the fate of being imprisoned in an underground prison that never saw the light of day until his death. Kargith was imprisoned in the underground prison, his left hand secured to the prison pillar by a steel handcuff. In order to break free from the handcuffs, Kargith chose to destroy his own left hand. Kargith led the beastman slaves who also chose to give up their left hand and use their sharp fists instead. They fought like the slaves of Spartacus before Duce's transmigration against the Roman Empire. They killed the ogres who had enslaved them. Kargith carried the head of the ogre leader and announced the formation of a new clan. A clan that yearned for freedom and fought for it, the Shattered Palm clan. Therefore, this batch of Shattered Palm tribe's orcs were all super elites who had killed their way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Just one charge from Cunnud was enough for Orgrim to realize that this wasn't an opponent he could deal with unscathed. From the corner of his eyes, Orgrim glanced at a few famous chieftains or heroes who were watching coldly from the side. Grom Hellscream, Kilrog Deadeye, Samuro. Orgrim wasn't sure if the strongest of these tribes had any intentions of making a move. But he had to prepare for the worst. He had to end the battle quickly. Cunnud was also holding a war hammer in his right hand. It wasn't as big as Destroyer Hammer, just a little smaller, but Orgrim didn't dare to underestimate it. It was the same hammering, but Cunnud's movements gave off a solid feeling, as if he had been hammered thousands of times. He stepped forward, raised his left arm, swung his right arm, and suddenly exerted force. At first glance, it didn't seem surprising at all. Only warriors who had been through countless battles would notice that Cunnud didn't make any extra movements. Whether it was the angle, strength, or speed, they were all exquisite to the extreme. Moreover, it gave Orgrim enough time to change his attack. Without a choice, Orgrim also raised his hammer and clashed with Cunnud's hammer. Clang! The clanging sound of the two largest hammers clashing almost broke the eardrums of the spectating orcs. The buzzing sound of metal caused most of the orcs to cover their ears. No one expected Cunnud to suddenly throw away the hammer in his hand and stab with his left hand. His left arm was his killing move. After closing the distance, the scimitar that was as long as a human's arm had unimaginable agility. Although Orgrim's Destroyer Hammer was sharp, such a large hammer was never a good defensive weapon. In the next moment, the unique scimitar of the Shattered Palm tribe was about to pierce into Orgrim's chest. At this moment, a huge hand the size of a palm leaf fan suddenly blocked in front of the scimitar. Puk! Blood splashed everywhere. The sharp blade easily pierced through Orgrim's left palm and into his chest. However, it was unable to pierce into his heart. Orgrim's left palm suddenly clenched tightly. Even though his palm was pierced, he still managed to hold onto the bottom part of the scimitar, which was his arm. Gotcha. Orgrim's voice had an indescribable coldness in it. Kennard wanted to retreat, but the giant hand held onto his arm tightly. Since both of them were so close, using a big hammer was just a joke. There wasn't enough distance for him to exert his strength. It was too close. Orgrim had a more direct way. Just like what Kennard did with his right hand, he threw away his destroyer hammer. Almost at the same time, his right hand turned into a hammer and pierced Kennard's throat. Cough! Kennard's muffled voice was the last sound he made in this world. At the next moment, Orgrim turned his finger into a hook and pierced Kennard's throat. Simple, violent, full of barbaric aesthetics. This was the beastman's love. This was the beastman's worship. Oh. The boiling sound waves surged into the sky and seemed to cross countless light years and the endless void to reach planet Draenor. He withdrew his left hand from the scimitar and kicked away Kennard, who was about to lose his life and become a corpse. Orgrim raised his fists and roared for the 7th time. Who else? Orgrim looked at the faces of the strongest existences in the horde. Grom, Kilrog, Samuro. With his body riddled with scars, Orgrim dared to say that he wouldn't have more than a 50% chance of winning against any one of them. But it was impossible for him to back down. And he would not back down. This was not only because of his life and his glory, but also because he felt that he was shouldering the last request of his good friend Doroten. He shouldered the heavy responsibility of leading the tribe to a path of survival in this strange and unfriendly world. Apart from the passion in his eyes, there was only clarity. Orgrim's godlike eyes scanned the faces of the experts in the tribe one by one. There was no provocation. All he saw was obedience. One of the experts lowered his head. 2 of the experts lowered their heads. 3-10. When Orgrim saw Samuro's face, Samuro punched his chest with one hand. This was the etiquette for meeting the great chief. Kilrog and Grom looked at each other. Kilrog said, "My dead eye saw that Orgrim shouldn't die here. I won't sacrifice my life for an irreversible fate." With that, Kilrog bowed as well. Grom said, "I am very satisfied with my position as the Warsong tribe chief." With that, he bowed as well. At this point, the second great chief of the horde was born. Chapter 202. Caer Daroshir, northeast of the Hillsbrad Hills. The Barra family's castle was located on a beautiful island surrounded by water. The beautiful Lake Daromir was the castle's most beautiful scenery, and also the best moat. The southern side of the island was relatively flat, and this was where the essence of the Barra family's industry was gathered. Large blacksmiths were connected to each other, and thick chimneys were constantly emitting black smoke. People came and went on the island, and the merchants' caravans were endless. On the western side of the island, there was a large port that was clearly not for civilian use. Duque actually saw a small warship here, which was obviously used by the Barra family to protect their home. The island was not completely separated from the shore. There was a 200-meter-long stone bridge that could accommodate 4 carriages side by side that connected the island to the shore. The lake was not deep, and the water was about 2 meters deep, allowing people to see the bottom through the clear water. Of course, there were at least 10 cannons on the fortress that protected the entire Barra family's castle, and their muzzles were facing the shore. If someone really led an army to kill their way through the narrow mountain road, it would be a real live shooting practice. No one from the attacking army would be able to cross the bridge alive. Duque stood on his horse on the shore. If not for Duque's transmigration, this prosperous island would have become a deathly silent and terrifying place in a few decades. The entire Barra family would have been destroyed, and this place would have been occupied by Kel Thuzad's cursing sect. It would have become a very famous place in the future, Scholomance. Duque would never forget how he and his companions were wiped out time and time again in the game. He could remember every single point after they were wiped out. Duque suddenly sighed. "Master, what's wrong?" Makarov asked Duque attentively. "Nothing, it's just a little boring." At this time, one of Duque's private soldiers rushed back. Report, there seems to be some trouble ahead. Makarov suddenly frowned. Didn't we already inform him that His Excellency would come to visit? That's right. But a caravan suddenly overturned their carriage on the bridge, dumping a large amount of goods and attracting cattle, sheep and animals. Now the only bridge to the island is blocked. The Barov family said they were very sorry and asked us to wait for a while, the private soldier said. Makarov's face was as dark as ink. What about the ferry? They were all sent out before we made the announcement. What mistake? This was clearly a show of strength. Master, Duque didn't mind at all. Instead he laughed. Haha, Barov and his men really think we're beggars. I'm going to blast those guys on the bridge. Makarov was furious. He waved his hand to summon his private soldiers, ready to rush over and push everything in their way into the water. No need. Duque pointed his horsewhip at the castle on the island. I want to tell Barov that before I became a duke, I was first a powerful mage. And Stormwind is not dead. Pass the order, change the horseshoes. Horseshoes? Horseshoes could protect the horse's hooves from cracking. But horseshoes were only used in a world of ice and snow. Fortunately, the troops came along the edge of the snow-covered Alterac Mountains, so they were prepared for horseshoes. It didn't take long for the horseshoes to be changed. Meanwhile, in Barov's castle, Alex Barov received a report from his subordinates. They stopped. Yes, they stopped before they even got close to the bridge. Let's leave them hanging. I don't mean to humiliate them, but I don't want to see this young duke opening his mouth. In troubled times, food is very precious. At that moment, hurried footsteps came from outside the door. It was another of Barov's personal attendants. Duke, they're here. Duke Marcus and his men are here. Barov frowned. His personal attendant rarely lost his composure. If it was a normal arrival, he wouldn't have made such a fuss and run over breathlessly. Moreover, Duque had used some kind of unexpected method to cross 100 meters of water. They're here? How did they get here? Ice. That Marcus froze the lake. Hearing his subordinate's report, Duke Barov quickly left the room and went to the other side of the castle, which was a terrace close to the bridge to the south. He saw a scene that he would never forget. Above his head, the warm sun. In front of him, a kilometer of ice. Darlong Mill Lake, which Caer Darrow Castle relied on as a barrier, was completely frozen. A group of people galloped on the slippery ice, heading straight for the castle. The rumbling of the horses alarmed countless people who were working on the island. Not far away, Duke Barov saw that his guard captain was stupefied. He clearly held the alarm bell in his hand, yet he didn't know whether to ring it or not to ring it. Fortunately, at the last moment, the captain saw Duke Barov. The Duke heaved a long sigh and made a beckoning gesture. The captain was relieved. Open the gate. Welcome, distinguished guest. In fact, in order to pretend to be in a hurry, the gate was always open. However, having guards lined up to welcome him was completely different from not having guards lined up. As if he was waiting for the guards to line up, the moment the Barov family's private army finished lining up and blew the welcome horn, Duke arrived. Duque knocked on the horse's belly, and a tall, pure white steed galloped over the frozen lake. At this moment, Duque did not look like a mortal at all against the backdrop of the falling snow. He wore a white mage crown with purple patterns on the top, and a white stormwind robe with blue edges, fluttering in the wind. At his waist was a belt brimming with a baleful aura, and exuding a mysterious blue arcane radiance. At his waist was a strange ornament faintly flickering with lightning, which was even more dazzling. The pure white cloak he wore fluttered in the wind and snow, and the golden rune patterns embroidered on the cloak could be vaguely seen. Although he looked like a gentle and elegant young man, he gave people the feeling that he was a god who walked out of the snowstorm. Stepping on the ice, Duque's warhorse neighed even more. However, this appearance startled Duke Barov, who came out to welcome him. Next to him, Makarov grabbed the reins of his horse, jumped off lightly and immediately announced, Duke Marcus, the court mage of Stormwind, the Duke of Karazhan, the destroyer of hundreds of thousands of orcs. Next to him, 4 carriages were lined up. Duque's private army quickly opened the boxes in the carriages. 2 carriages of golden bars, and 2 carriages of frozen orc heads. Duke Barev's eyelids twitched. Chapter 203. Duke Barev was not young. In his life, he had seen many different kinds of people. There were thieves, bandits, trolls, and nobles. He had never seen a person so domineering and overbearing. But he was not blindly domineering. At least he came with wealth. Give my friends wealth, and give my enemies death. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the long carriages behind Duque. Even if he did not want to admit it, Duke Barev had to say, "This little guy is well prepared." Recalling the information on Duke Marcus, the boy who rose miraculously, Barev felt a headache. He was too young and his status was too high. If Duque was a title passed down from his ancestors, Duke Barev could still treat Duque like a junior. But obviously Duque was not. Last summer, at the age of 14, he was selected to become a magic apprentice at the Storm Royal Magic Academy in the East County Abbey. In the same year, at the admission ceremony, he became an official Earth mage with unparalleled talent, and rejected the request of Mediv, the guardian of Azeroth, to take him as a disciple. Later, it turned out that Duque was right, because he was sensitive to Medivh's demonic aura. That was not all. In the next few months, he single-handedly conquered a small Naga clan from somewhere, and controlled nearly 10,000 murlocs. He opened up a route between Stormwind City and the Western Wilderness in one fell swoop, and opened up a pearl route that earned tens of thousands of dollars a day. But there was still more to come. When Mediv was controlled by Sargeras and opened the dark portal, Duque, who was only 15 years old, fought his way into Karazhan with the famous Anduin Lothar, killed Mediv, and kicked Sargeras into the bottomless abyss. After that, whether it was burning 100,000 beastmen, luring and killing the tribal chief, or using a huge ice ship to rescue 50,000 Stormwind Kingdom's elite soldiers, everything Duke did could be called a miracle. Unfortunately, there were a lot of witnesses and material evidence for everything, so there was no room for any falsification. No, it should be said that the scene of the frozen sea was witnessed by Duke Barev himself. This was indeed. That's amazing. Master Marcus, how did you seal the lake's surface with ice? How is the energy output of the ice elemental realm balanced? What about magic coordination? A spell? Is it purely the ice element, or is it combined with the arcana element? Hearing the familiar female voice beside him, Duke Barev felt a headache. Sorry, I'm so excited. I haven't introduced myself. I am Janice Barev, mistress of the Barev family. Of course, before that I was a sky mage, the junior sister of Dalaran's archmage Antonidas. The elegant lady sold Duke Barev out completely the moment she opened her mouth. That's right. Magic first or husband first? Was there a need to ask? Of course it was magic. Ignoring the black lines on her husband's forehead, Madame Janice, like a fan, approached Duque, who had just dismounted from the horse, and asked him about this and that. Well, before the negotiations started, the Barev family had already lost 20%. Duke Barev was embarrassed and could only cough twice. Dear, don't you think it is very rude to leave an honored guest at the door? Yes. Let's go inside and talk. Janice was so enthusiastic that she almost pulled Duque's hand and dragged Duque inside. Stepping through the huge gate of the castle, Duque gazed at the castle, which was shrouded in flourishing greenery in midsummer, and suddenly felt a myriad of emotions. It turned out that this place was so beautiful before it became Scholomance College. As a great aristocrat of noble birth, wealth, power, and influence, it was certainly impossible for him to live on a bare stone island. As the owner of the castle, the Barev family had obviously carefully selected the trees on the island. They would not be too tall, which would be an obstacle to their defense, and would also be able to ensure lush greenery most of the time. If there was anything that this castle touched Duque, it was that he had a feeling of nostalgia. Once upon a time, as a university student with corrupt ideals, he also thought that one day when he became rich, he would buy a villa for vacation or something. With his status as a duke and his current wealth, he could definitely do this. Unfortunately, since he had come to Azeroth, the concept of a stable home, which was a very common concept in peaceful times, was now distant and unfamiliar to Duque, as if it had nothing to do with him. If it was not for the series of crises that would follow in Azeroth, which would cause the whole world to be embroiled in destruction and rebirth, perhaps this castle would have been Duque's ultimate goal. Looking at every detail in this prosperous and serene castle, Duque suddenly wondered if he should transform Karazhan at some point. Walking along the spacious and brightly decorated corridor, Duke Barev's gate was 9 streets ahead of Duque's. His shoulders were straight and did not sway at all. His slightly raised chin did not make people feel that he was too arrogant, and he appeared to be quite confident. Every step he took seemed to have been measured with a ruler, not 1 inch more, not 1 inch less. In terms of aristocratic etiquette, this real Duke was much, much better than Duque, who had crossed over to the front line. Duque was very clear that if he did not make a comeback, there would be no need to talk when it came to the negotiation table. This was not an exaggeration. The secret of negotiation was that the success of a negotiation depended on how much preparation you had done before sitting at the negotiation table. You had to use what you had, and what the other party wanted to whet the other party's appetite. If you lost too much before sitting at the negotiation table, no matter how much effort you put in, it would be looked down upon and disregarded. He wanted to pry open the Barev family's treasure chest and take out the most valuable thing in the treasure chest, food. First, he had to grasp the Barev family's weak spot. If he could not do this, any groveling, kneeling, and crying would be meaningless. Unless he led an army to rob it, he would not be able to get a single grain from the Barev family's granary. Fortunately, Duque knew what to do next. Of course, before that, Duque gently activated his magic circuit. This was definitely a common thing among mages. Many mages like to continuously absorb the elemental molecules in the atmosphere, and even gradually condense the purer magic power into better circuits to replace the old or broken circuits in their bodies. But what Duque did was a little exaggerated. In just a second, Duque had scanned all the magic traps within a 300-meter radius with the system elf. Lady Janice could clearly feel that in that instant, the magic traps and magic circles that she had originally controlled all deviated slightly. It was not that she did not want to regain absolute control of these magic circles, but the magic circles seemed to be afraid of her and cowered away from her. She suddenly realized that as long as Duque wanted to, his uncontrollable power would dominate and take over everything in an instant. Chapter 204. For a moment, Janice tried to regain control of everything and regroup the magic traps in a short time. But the Princess Barev soon gave up, feeling a disagreeable sensation which was at once familiar and strange to her. God, Duque, you remind me of Antonidas. This old brother of his makes me feel so helpless. Even though Janice had her hands on her hips and was lecturing a junior, Duke Barev was still shocked to hear his proud wife compare Duque to Antonidas. Just now, Duke Barev could not hide the shock on his face. The magic defense system I painstakingly set up was seen through by him in one glance. Not only here, but also those in your dormitory. I told you, with my level of skill, I can only defend against petty thieves. I can't defend against a true master. In front of a true archmage, setting up such a clumsy magic trap would reveal the location of the trap in advance. Janice scolded her husband without holding back. Sorry, I was hit by the magic trap and overreacted. Duque raised his head slightly. There was a lightning magic trap hidden on top of the gorgeous chandelier. As long as Janice willed it, or pressed a switch in a secret passage at the side of the corridor, the entire 20-meter-long corridor would be baptized by lightning. Duque's sincere apology made Duke Barev even more embarrassed. All right. Our guests must be hungry after coming all the way here. Let's eat first. In the beautiful dining hall, Duque, who was sitting at a long table that could seat 10 people, fell into a new dilemma. Western etiquette was quite complicated. Unfortunately, Duque's understanding of it was limited to holding a fork in his left hand a knife in his right, and not talking while eating. Then, when Duque saw the elegant butler place a large number of spoons and forks of different sizes beside his plate, Duque was dumbfounded. The habits of nobles were quite troublesome. If he took the wrong thing, he would be looked down upon. Duque didn't have the chance to cram on this knowledge. Similarly, because he didn't have this knowledge in his head, the system elf couldn't save him. When Duque felt the Duke and Duchess looking at him, Duque suddenly felt glad that the Duchess was a mage and quite obsessed with him. Did you know, Mrs. Barov, in fact, low-level spells are very helpful in training one's multicasting ability. Oh, Janice's eyes lit up. This was multiple casting. Countless people had practiced metamagic abilities for a long time, without being able to develop any. But everyone knew that a mage who was good at casting multiple spells could definitely take on 2 or 3 mages of the same level. Janice had also heard some rumors about Duque. My teacher is Huijia, the Hundred-Handed Reaper. In fact, I learned the rarest way to train my multicasting ability from my teacher. Since we hit it off so well, I might as well introduce you to each other. Oh, my little Duque is the best. Hurry up and teach me. If I really learn it, I'll help you bully my old man at the negotiating table. As soon as she said that, Duke Barov's hand froze in the middle of reaching for the spoon. He had always known that his wife was a magic maniac. Back then Janice, who was beautiful and noble, was absolutely loved by everyone. Thinking back to the time when he, handsome and elegant, finally plucked the Dalajan rose with all his magic treasures, it was something he was proud of for decades, both for his feelings and for his career. He didn't expect that after decades, because of magic for the first time, he would feel like he was tricked by his wife. Duke Barov was really speechless. Don't worry, dear, it won't be too hard for you. Janice symbolically comforted her husband, and then looked at Duque without blinking. Duque made an apologetic expression to Duke Barov, and then activated Hands of Magic. When the 12 hands of magic appeared, they simultaneously helped Duque tie the napkin, cut the food, swirled the wine, poured it into his mouth, and wiped his mouth with the napkin. After a series of dazzling magic performances, who would pay attention to whether Duque used the right spoon or knife? Duque even instigated, Duchess, you can start with the 2 simplest hands of magic, and let the 2 additional hands of magic help you complete the actions of daily life. After a while, you'll find that you can easily multitask. Hands of Magic was, of course, the simplest level 0 spell. It was when a mage focused all their attention on one hand of magic. When using 2 or 4 hands at the same time, the mental power required was completely geometrically increased. But it was undeniable that this method could indeed train one's ability to cast multiple spells. Seeing that his wife was easily bought over, Duke Barov also looked helpless. Soon, this somewhat ceremonially ridiculous meal was over. To Duque's surprise, Duke Barov actually agreed to immediately start the negotiations in the afternoon. Originally, Duque thought that Duke Barov would deliberately give him the cold shoulder. In a private meeting hall, the lights were brightly lit. Duke Barov sat on one side of the conference table. Beside him was a secretary, and behind him stood 2 guards who were obviously experts. On Duque's side, there was only one attendant, Makarov. Duke Barov clasped his hands together, his chin resting on the back of his fingers. He immediately got to the point. Duke Marcus, I have to admit that I have underestimated you. Your talent in the field of magic is unparalleled, and your wisdom is also evident in negotiations. Janice is my darling, and her pressure forced me to open this negotiation in a passive position. But I hope you understand that personal feelings are not the main factor in this negotiation. The Barov family does have the food that Stormwind urgently needs. I just want to ask, if the Barov family takes out the food that is equivalent to the family's lifeline as a bargaining chip, what will the Barov family get? Duque did not hesitate. Safety, and the continuation of the Barov family. Duke Barov immediately frowned, obviously thinking of something bad. Duque flipped his left palm. Don't misunderstand. The swords of the Stormwind warriors will never be pointed at humans. I think it is necessary for me to educate you on the destructive power of the beast men. Prince Barav made a gesture of invitation. Duque cast a spell that looked like magic mirror. Duke Barav saw this, and was immediately moved. Chapter 205. In this era, there were no video recorders. No matter how good the magic mirror spell was, it could only transmit current events, which was to use magic to make a live broadcast. It was also affected by distance, elemental fluctuations, and a series of other factors, making it quite unstable. If one were to say that recording a certain event was in the realm of the bronze dragons, who could control space and time, among the humans, even the most famous astral mage Mediv only had a deep understanding of space. What Duque was doing now was completely beyond Duke Barav's imagination. Three-dimensional projection. Before Duque's transmigration, the true meaning of holographic projection technology had not yet been formed. But the wise and far-sighted humans had already built a huge triangular cone made up of 4 triangular pieces of glass. And through the combination of projections in 4 directions, it became a true three-dimensional projection. Duque's system elf also extracted Duque's knowledge in this area, and replayed the memories imprinted in Duque's mind in the most three-dimensional and realistic way. It was the Battle of Red Ridge Mountain. Duke Barav only saw, in the projection, a green tide suddenly surging from the other side of the mountain. More than 10,000 orc warriors surged from the mountain passes and mountain ridges towards the human camp. He only saw a huge orc among the orcs raise half of his body and roar towards the sky. His braided hair spread out in the wind, and together with that shocking roar, it was awe-inspiring. The orcs were split in 2 amidst the rumbling of the earth. This terrifying green tide drowned the entire mountainside in a few blinks of an eye. The surging tide was sniped by the arrows shot by the human fortresses, but it was meaningless. Instead, it aroused the orcs' ferocity. They turned into the most terrifying destructive demons, easily attacking the fortresses, using the most brutal method to break through the thick mud walls, and dragging out the humans hiding in the fortresses, and tearing them to pieces. The scene changed, and showed the orcs attacking the eastern and northern walls of Stormwind City. They also did not care about their lives, using their flesh and blood to resist the rain of javelins and ballistae. The green tide drowned the walls. Unknowingly, Duke Barav's entire back was soaked in cold sweat. Is this thing real? Can you demonstrate it again? Can I ask my wife to watch it? Prince Barav asked 3 questions in a row. Duque only had one answer. Sure. In fact, when Duque replayed the scene, Duchess Barav, who had rushed over after hearing the news, was even more shocked. One was an orc, and the other was a magician. However, Lady Janice managed to suppress her curiosity in the field of magic very well. Dear, I have to say this should be true, Duque calmly said. In fact, I also prepared an orc warrior as a captive. I put him to sleep. However, you can let your guards test the strength of the beast men. Of course, you have to be mentally prepared for the sacrifice of your subordinates. Duke Barav nodded gravely. Half an hour later, Prince Barav and his wife returned to the negotiating table with ashen faces. The results were too shocking. Even though Duque had repeatedly emphasized the strength of the orcs, Duke Barav had sent 5 fully armed men to deal with an unarmed orc, and Duke Barav's side had paid the price of 1 dead and 2 seriously injured to kill the orc. But those damned orcs can't pass through Solder Bridge, Duke Barav argued. Solder Bridge, this huge stone bridge that connected the 2 continents, was indeed a natural stronghold. Duque was also quite speechless about this huge cable bridge. This should not have appeared in a world that seemed to be set in the Middle Ages on Earth, with magic and swords as its core. Don't forget, planet Azeroth was the experimental factory of the Titans of creation, so a lot of black technology was set aside. At least when the dwarves already had steam-powered tanks, humans were still using swords. Of course, those huge tanks were also unreliable. For example, their endurance was terrible, and they would collapse after 1 or 2 kilometers. This did not stop the people here from having all sorts of strange confidence. Duque did not directly refute. He just quietly took out a rough map of the northern continent of the Eastern Kingdom, pointed lightly, and then drew a line from right to left. Duke Barov had already admitted defeat in his heart, but he still did not give up. He finally asked, "Are you sure those green beasts can drive the ships?" Duque nodded silently. Even though the Horde's ships looked like a huge pile of garbage floating on the sea, and he could not agree with the orcs' crude and terrible aesthetics, there was no doubt that the Horde's ships could indeed pass through the sea. Duke Barov and his wife did not look very good. What Duque had just pointed out was the hinterlands in the east of the northern continent. The Horde would disembark from the coast at the easternmost part of the hinterlands, at the bottom of the Seaview Cliff. From east to west across the entire hinterlands, they would arrive at the Barov family's territory. The Barov family was indeed huge, but it was a pity that they were geographically long. From South Shore in the southwest, all the way to Cair Darrow in the northeast. In a sense, if the Horde really invaded along the route Duque had pointed out, the Barov family would also act as a barrier for the Alterac royal family. Attacking in advance, or setting up defenses would also be troublesome. After all, most of the hinterlands was covered in dense primeval forests, and that was the territory of the trolls who had been fighting against the humans for 1,000 years. Even after spending 1,000 years, the humans still could not completely eradicate the trolls from the hinterlands. The scariest thing was that Duque also said, "I bet that when the Horde can't cross the Solder Bridge, they will look for other routes. The hinterlands will be their first choice. And the great chief of the Horde will definitely do everything possible to pull the trolls into the Horde's camp. So by next year, the Barov family will very likely have to face the Horde's allied army." This time, Duke Barov and his wife were completely at ease. The Barov family was indeed wealthy, but military affairs had never been their strong suit. They had always had a complementary relationship with the Alterac royal family. But after seeing how strong the Horde was in the mountains, the Barov family no longer had any hope that the Alterac kingdom could withstand the Horde's attack. After all, before the Alterac kingdom entered a state of total war, the regular army only had a mere 4,000 people. Among them, there were only 500 cavalrymen. If the video provided by Duque was real, the Alterac kingdom did not have the slightest chance of withstanding the Horde's attack, even if it was just a Horde army coming from the hinterlands. At this time, Duque suddenly added fuel to the fire. If the Horde comes from the hinterlands, who can the Barov family rely on? The Riptide fortress that is busy defending the bridge? The Dalajan that is practicing isolationism? The Lordaeron that is thousands of miles away? Or the 50,000 Stormwind elite soldiers that have experience fighting against the orcs in South Shore? Chapter 206. If it were not for Duque's video in the orcs' bloody battles, Duke Barov would have scoffed at Duque's 50,000 elite soldiers. In this era, the so-called rumors always had too much of an exaggeration. 100,000 soldiers? It would be good enough if there were 30,000 soldiers. Of course, the nobles and generals of this era were also used to counting peasant soldiers who had little fighting power and would go to the battlefield with pitchforks. They even counted auxiliary soldiers who helped transport food. After feeling the threat of the orcs so clearly, Duke Barov's view of Duque and the Stormwind behind Duque changed greatly. Encountering such a terrifying and organized barbarian race, who could protect so many citizens and elite soldiers, Duke Barov felt that it was a miracle. Duque saw that Duke Barov was tempted. A very sincere smile appeared on Duque's face. Of course, this is only a possible future. There is no absolute certainty that the Horde will come from the hinterlands. But Duke, don't you think that selling food in exchange for my personal friendship with Stormwind, His Majesty Rin, and me is a very good deal? At this time, Duque raised 3 fingers. On behalf of Stormwind, I propose to purchase 5,000 tons of wheat at a premium of 30% over the current market price, and it will be paid in Arother gold coins. At the same time, as a symbol of personal friendship, I can unconditionally transfer the exclusive rights of the New Pearl line in the Hilbrad Hills and Arother Highlands to you. Duke Barov's expression was one of shock. Duque was too smart. 5,000 tons was exactly the total amount of the Barov family's old wheat. Duke Barov wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death to say that Duke didn't secretly gather intelligence. In this era, storage technology was also quite bad. Even if the grain was stored in a cool, dry cave, it would rot in at most 3 years. Of course, Duke Barov knew that as refugees, it was good enough to fill their stomachs. But 5,000 tons of old grain in exchange for a large amount of money and Stormwind's friendship was not a bad deal. Prince Barov could not think of any reason why he should refuse, either from a commercial point of view or as an insurance for the future. Duque stood up and stretched out his right hand. Dear Duke, for the future of the Stormwind people, and for the future of all humans in Azeroth, please agree to help. As a best actor, as a leader who was likely to control the future of humanity, Duque's smile was very sincere, at least on the surface. Duke Barov and his wife looked at each other and sighed deeply. They stood up together and extended their hands to Duque. Even though I still have many doubts about the strength of the Horde and the direction of their attack, even though I am not a prophet who can see the future, I choose to believe in you, the person who created such an atmosphere in order to successfully negotiate. I believe in you, the person who has such spirit. I agree to this. As the dust settled, Makarov's heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled down. Makarov did not participate in the final defense of Stormwind City. He had been sent to take care of the refugee camp in South Shore. If Edwin Van Cleef was only in charge of the construction department, then before Duque's arrival, he was the real person in charge. Duque had done a lot of preparatory work for the refugee camp in South Shore. From the delineation of residential and functional areas, to water, sanitation and security, Duque had drawn no less than 50 blueprints for this. But the most important thing, food, had not been settled. As the number of refugees increased day by day, the food hoarded in South Shore decreased at a visible rate. Even if each refugee could only get 2 pitifully small pieces of black bread a day, it still could not reduce the rate of food consumption. After all, the number of refugees had increased by nearly 10,000 every day. Now Duque had negotiated the food deal. At long last, the urgent matter had been resolved. Patriarch Barov smiled and clasped Duque's hand tightly. Duke Marcus, I still have to discuss this matter with His Majesty. If there are no surprises, it won't be a problem. Eden will listen to my opinion most of the time. Actually, what I want the most is your personal friendship. Alex Barov was indeed a shrewd old man, and Duque could tell the meaning behind his words. Only a small number of people could call the king by his name. Just like now, only Anduin and the Queen of Lang would call the King of Lang as Lang. The fact that Duke Barov could call King Alterac by his name was a subtle reminder of the special relationship between him and the king. As someone who knew the direction of history, Duque naturally wouldn't say it out loud. He said to Duke Barov with incomparable familiarity, I think so too. How about Uncle Alex, just call me Duque from now on. I'll feel much more comfortable that way. Duque, Uncle is very happy to meet you. After saying that, the two foxes had already left the negotiation table and were passionately hugging each other's shoulders. While Duque's negotiation had made decisive progress, Lang's negotiation had reached a stalemate. No, it should be said that there was no progress at all. In the guest house of Rotterdam, Lothar kept pacing around and finally punched the solid wall. Bastard! How many days has it been? Menethil too actually refused to meet us? Lothar's anger was justified. He and Lang had been in Rotterdam for 3 days. After the division of the Arother Empire, Terina's Menethil II, the king of Lordaeron, the strongest of the 7 human kingdoms, refused to meet King Leon, using his illness as an excuse. Calm down, Anduin. A meeting between kings is not as simple as you think. Lang sat upright on the chair and casually took a sip of black tea. But the tribe is getting stronger every day. The Griffin Knights and spies I left on the other side of the sea have discovered that the dark portal has been reopened. Large numbers of orcs continue to pour into this world, but the King of Rotterdam refuses to meet us. And that stupid Duke, he looks at us like we're beggars. Lothar couldn't control his temper. King Lang put down his exquisite teacup. A king who has lost his kingdom is indeed no different from a beggar. Anduin, we need to be patient. Patience. Our enemies are increasing their troops crazily, and our people are starving in South Shore. To hell with patience. At this moment, the only remaining Morning Star court mage who had been guarding Lang suddenly opened his old and muddy eyes. Your Majesty, the latest news is that Duke Marcus and Duke Barov's negotiations have been successful. He has already reached an agreement with the Barov family and purchased 5,000 tons of wheat at a premium of 30% over the market price. Chapter 207. A 30% premium? That bastard from the Barov family. I'm going to kill him. Lothar's anger was almost bursting through the sky. Calm down. Anduin. Calm down. The people in South Shore are the citizens of Stormwind, not Alterax's citizens. No kingdom, including Rotterdam, can provide for hundreds of thousands of refugees without compensation. After Lang poured cold water on Lothar's head, Lothar finally calmed down. How's South Shore now? Noxus did not ask the Morning Star wizard this time, but another attendant. At this moment, a letter from a Griffin Knight arrived. Lang and Anduin opened the letter and found that it was from Duke Bolvar for Dragon, who was in charge of guarding South Shore. Your Majesty, I know you have been concerned about the situation of the citizens in South Shore. I'm here to report the latest news. In fact, the situation of the refugees is improving rapidly. More than half of the refugees have moved into wooden houses. Mr. Edwin Van Cleef, who is in charge of building the houses, seems to have adopted a method of building houses called molding from Duke Marcus. Although the houses look the same, it can prevent our people from being exposed to the sun and rain in a short period of time. The new temporary palace has been built. It's on top of a hill at the edge of South Shore, and you can overlook the sea. His Highness William is very fond of the new 2-story stone palace. The merfolk under Sir Marcus have started to chase a large number of fish to the coast. I saw with my own eyes that as long as they cast a net on the shore, they will definitely be able to catch fish. I have to say this is a miracle. It would be even better if we could get food from the Barov family. That's because the food collected from the Western Wilderness and Rotterdam can only last for 2 weeks at most. Although I don't want to admit it, I have no place to interfere in the civil affairs. Sir Marcus's arrangements are perfect, and my interference will only make things worse. The only problem now is that the people are pessimistic about the future of the country. Sir Benedict has tried his best to appease the people, but unfortunately, the effect is not great. The worst thing is that we lack food, necessary equipment, and a clear military goal. The morale of the army is at its lowest. After reading Ballwold's letter, Lang heaved a long sigh of relief. Bolvar and Benedict did their best, and I can't blame them for anything. Lang put down the letter. Indeed, Benedict is a good man but not a capable one, Noxus said. In fact, Archbishop Benedict of Stormwind City was also a good friend of his. They had known each other for more than 20 years. On the contrary, our little Duque can always surprise us. I almost forgot that he's actually a mage, and not my assistant minister. Lang showed a rare smile. I think we should give little Duque more power and more responsibility. Don't be fooled by his appearance. He is indeed a genius, but he is actually only 15 years old. Lothar showed Lang the white hair on his temples. That was proof that she had been harmed by Sargeraz's last curse. I know, but we don't have anyone we can use, do we? Even if it's you, I think you should find an assistant. All right, I will think about it. Lang thought for a moment, and wrote a letter asking Bolvar to give more autonomy to Duque. 5 days later, South Shore. Duque rushed back travel-worn. He made a trip to Alterac on his way back, which could be considered a visit to the king. But as Duque expected, he did not see King Eden Pirinold. First, The king was unhappy that Duque had taken a detour to the Bear family instead of coming to Alterac, which was closer. Secondly, Eden had received a secret report from Turinas, the king of Lordaeron. It seemed that the king of the strongest of the 6 kingdoms had the intention to convene a major meeting involving all the human kingdoms, dwarves, and elves for the one that had just been removed. King Eden was distraught, and naturally had no time to entertain Duque, who was obviously promoted to the front lines as an emissary. An edict allowing Stormwind to build a refugee camp in South Shore, and a meal of food from the Alterac royal family. It was like sending off a beggar to Duque. Makarov was naturally indignant, but Duque just laughed it off. Since he knew the direction of history, he knew very well what kind of person the king of Alterac was. Duque did not care about anything else. He got the edict, ignored the food carts, and went straight back to South Shore. From the north to the south, he came out of the Altrank Mountains, entered the Hillsbrad Hills, passed Terran Mill, and was about to reach South Shore. Makarov was stupefied by the rows of neatly arranged wooden houses that looked like a lattice on the side of the road. Those who did not know the situation would think that a huge new city had been built here, and not a refugee camp that could accommodate nearly 500,000 people. When they saw Duke's family flag that was filled with death and terror, the children playing around the house, the women knitting or cooking, and the men building the house, everyone in the campsite and the surrounding forest raised their heads. Ah, it's Sir Marcus's flag. Is it that Sir Marcus? Quick, bow your heads and salute. He is our great benefactor, Duke Marcus. The children and men saluted, and the peasant women saluted in an unfamiliar ladylike manner. There was no organization, no coercion, and they all saluted Duque spontaneously. Not only the people, but also the city guards, sheriffs, and passing legions, all knelt on one knee and placed their left hands on their chest, showing their heartfelt respect to the owner of the flag. To the people, counterattacking Stormwind City was something that was too far away. Perhaps the people were ignorant, and they did not know too many twists and turns. Their focus was only on the simplest and most simple things such as clothing, food, housing, and transportation. Saving them from the brutal beastmen could naturally gain their gratitude for a while. But for the people to truly recognize him, it would take long-term efforts to at least meet their basic needs. Duque did it. He not only used his fleet to save hundreds of thousands of Stormwind citizens, but he also built South Shore into a holy place where there was no hunger or cold, and there was not too much suffering. On the way here, not a single refugee had died on the way, and not a single citizen had shown a look of despair. Duke used his miraculous methods to stop the collapse of the building. In the eyes of the people, compared to King Rin, who lost his country, and Lothar, who was constantly defeated, Duque was the real hero. Salute our hero, Sir Duke Marcus. An unknown officer shouted. A second later, it was a tsunami of 100,000 soldiers and civilians shouting in unison. Long live Sir Duke Marcus. Chapter 208. His voice even startled the queen and the prince, who were gazing into the distance outside the new palace. Mother, is that Duke Marcus's horse team? Why do I feel that Duke Marcus is more popular than father? William asked his mother, slightly confused. This question made Bolvar, who was at the side, break out in cold sweat. The queen smiled apologetically at Bolvar, and then educated the little prince. William, you must remember, only those who give their people a good life are true heroes. Since ancient times, why are so many heroes who have defeated evil beings praised and remembered by people? The key is that they fight for the people. Fight for the people? Yes, they protect their people, and let them live a happy life, so they are heroes. Not only did Duke Marcus defeat the demon king Sargeras, but he also defeated the attacks of the orcs many times. He used his fleet to save hundreds of thousands of people, and let them all live a life of food and clothing. So Duke Marcus is now a hero in the hearts of the people. The queen patiently guided the little prince. Why do I hear the servants talking bad about father? They say that he is a king who lost his country or something, and not a hero. The queen didn't mind. Instead, she continued to guide William. That's because the people blame your father for the fall of Stormwind City. Don't take it to heart, William. One day, your father will take back Stormwind City and become the great hero in your heart again. Also, as a king, you should never be jealous of the achievements of your subordinates. Just like how your uncle Anduin is more famous than your father, there is no point in comparing. The glory of a hero can never overshadow the glory of a king. Do you understand? Yes. At this time, Duque's horse team had already arrived outside the new Stormwind Palace. The queen brought the prince to meet Duque. Duque didn't expect the queen to say, "Thank you, Duque. You are so outstanding. It's a pity that William doesn't have an elder sister. Otherwise, I would definitely let you marry into the royal family." This sentence almost choked Duque to death. Although the royal family would occasionally use marriages to win over their important ministers, Duque never thought that this would happen to him. Fortunately, Varian had no sisters. I'm actually still young. Don't look at me like this, I'm only 15 years old. Duque stammered. Duque also felt that it was a blessing in disguise. Originally, Sardra's curse had turned the young Khadgar into a small old man in history. However, with the help of the soul of Mediva's father and Lothar, and the fact that Mediva's counterattack came faster, he only aged a few years. Not only did he look more mature, but he also found that he had grown a lot taller after staying in Karazhan for a while. Now he was about 1.8 meters tall, which made him look like a young man in his 20s. This made it much easier for him to deal with foreign bigwigs. An underage youth was not qualified to sit at the negotiating table. 18 is a watershed. Even if Duque wasn't actually 18 years old, the fact that he looked like he was would make the other party feel much better. However, the queen's mention of marriage really scared Duque. Was this equivalent to feeding dog food to a single dog who had been single for 20 years in his previous life? He indeed. Strictly speaking, Varian should call you brother. Come Varian, call me brother Duque. Hello brother. William called out obediently. In an instant, Duque's heart received 100,000 points of happiness. Damn, Varian, who was revered by the players in his previous life, and was almost the representative of a generation of great men, had actually called him brother. Although William was just a Shota now, Qinghua was still Qinghua. Duque was touched to death. Seeing Duque's strange emotion, the queen and Duke Bolvar looked at each other and smiled. Duque, you've just become a noble, so it's no wonder. Most nobles will have their parents or relatives arrange marriage partners before they reach adulthood. It's a pity that the large families in Stormwind suffered heavy losses. Otherwise, I would have found a way to find you a beautiful noble lady to be your wife. Speaking of the word beautiful, for some reason, Duque thought of Aurelia, that meaty demon king. Alright, at this moment Duque was evil. Logically speaking, as a duke, shouldn't he have some maids and a harem that he could have as he pleased? Why am I still busy like a dog all day, running around everywhere? Sigh, thinking too much makes me cry. I'm really not in a hurry. There are too many things to do now. His Majesty has just given me instructions to complete an important mission. I have to complete this mission first. Duque spouted some nonsense and ran away. Damn, an arranged marriage. Why does it fall on my head? He thought. What if I'm given a crooked date? What if Aurelia wants to marry me? Duque thought as he ran away. The queen was amused. It's only at times like this that people realize that Duque is still a youth. Bolvar nodded with a smile. Yes, once things settle down, Duque's marriage will have to be on our agenda. It's the king's job to work hard for the revival of Stormwind at the negotiation table. It is my duty as the queen to gain more support for His Majesty through marriage. William is still too young, and Duque's age is just right. Bolvar had obviously done his homework. I've thought about this as well. Although it's a little unfair to Duque, I did gather some information. Oh, tell me about it. The queen's eyes twinkled, a mischievous smile on her face. Bolvar gave the first candidate. Duke Barov's daughter, Alicia Barov, is more suitable in terms of age and status. The queen nodded lightly and said, Marriage with the Barov family can indeed solve our current problem, but it's not ideal. Firstly, it might provoke the Alterac royal family. Secondly, I feel that Duque's achievements are not limited to this. A duke's daughter is not suitable for him. Bolvar immediately gave the second candidate. In fact, since Duke Marcus is a wizard with boundless prospects, and most of his assets are at sea, there is a very suitable candidate. Who? Princess Kurtiras, Her Highness Jaina Proudmoore, only 12 years old, is currently studying magic in the Dalajan. That's indeed a very suitable candidate. If we want to counterattack Stormwind City in the future, we can't do without Kurtiras' help. However, she seems to be close to Prince Arthas of Lordaeron and Prince Kuel Salas Kale, that's Sunstrider. The queen frowned. I see. That depends on the situation. Do you have any other recommendations? Bolvar shrugged. If we don't consider the Duke, then it can only be His Majesty Menethil's beloved daughter, Her Highness Kalia. Her age is very suitable, 15 years old. Chapter 209. Duque did not know that he had been sold by the Queen and Bolvar, who appeared to be loyal, but was actually a scoundrel. If he succeeded, then he would have been sold and still counted the money for them. After returning to South Shore, Duque was really busy. He only had a few words with the mayor of South Shore, the future legendary Henny Marab, and he was immediately overwhelmed by a lot of things. In the temporary official residence, which was a wooden house with a living room, a dining room, and 2 bedrooms, Duque had to face a mountain of official documents and messy requests. Obviously, Bolvar had not played the game SimCity, and did not understand city planning. His fief had been passed down from his ancestors since ancient times. Bolvar was a purer warrior, and he was not good at internal affairs. Therefore, the internal affairs eventually fell to Duque. Because he knew that Duque had strict requirements for city planning, he still had to get Duque's consent to the general direction. With a wave of his hand, Duque first took the special permission from Barov to suppress Mayor Marab. Your Lord Duke Barov allows us to set up refugee camps and related facilities anywhere in the Hillsbrad Hills. Then, Duque found the civil officials of Stormwind City, and with a wave of a pen, drew a circle on both sides of the road from South Shore to the Hillsbrad farm, which was more than 100 kilometers long. Well, it was all reclaimed as farmland, and he directly made it his home. Then, Duque asked Windsor to gather people to clean up the Yetis in the mine north of the road. This huge humanoid creature with a height of more than 3 meters was a great threat to the refugees in Stormwind. Well, there was also a mine called the Jasper Mine nearby, which was kindly accepted by Duque. Finally, Duque waited for 2 unexpected people, his followers Edwin Van Cleef and Grian Stallman. Your Excellency Duke Marcus Grian Stallman, the sheriff of the Western Wilderness, pays his respects. Looking at the middle-aged man with gray hair in front of him, Duke unknowingly froze. Duque had been keeping an eye on Grian Stallman. It was very simple, because according to history, this guy would become a marshal. He was one of the few grassroots heroes who managed to climb to the top in the disastrous Stormwind. Unlike Windsor, who died in the game's history, Garion was a late bloomer. Until Duque traveled to this world, Garion was still doing well as a marshal. Grian was born in the Wild West. In the history, he followed Lothar to South Shore when Stormwind City fell, and then joined the Knights of the First Holy Knight Uther. At that time, he was mainly active in the holy city of Stratholme. After that, Lordaeron was in chaos, and news of the Defias Brotherhood's rebellion came from the West Wilderness. He returned to the Western Wilderness alone to help his fellow villagers. Because Stormwind City didn't send any reinforcements to the Westmoreland, Old Man Garion was furious. So he put on his battle robe again, and called upon the people of the Westmoreland to form the Westmoreland People's Army to fight against the Defias Brotherhood. After the fall of the Brotherhood, Varian returned. Then came the Northern Expedition. Stallman's People's Army also participated in the Northern Expedition, and received a regular army, renamed the Moon Creek Brigade. Geryon himself also returned to the military system, and his title rose. After the Northern Expedition, the old man returned to his hometown with the Westmoreland People's Army. But not long after, the Great Cataclysm happened again, and the remnants of the Brotherhood rose again. Just like that, Geryon Stallman managed to climb to the position of Marshal after repeated struggles. Anyway, Duque knew that Geryon was a super powerful person. Now the Marshal of the future generation said the second sentence. Duke, I've talked to your follower Mr. Van Cleve. I think we can open up a battlefield in the Westmoreland. Break the Orcs' control over the Westmoreland. In the future, we can prepare for His Majesty Rin's counterattack against Stormwind City. Pfft. Duque spat out water. He really spat it out. He spat out the water he just drank in front of Van Cleve and Stallman. Even though he turned his head, he still spat it out. What the hell was this? This pair of gay friends who loved and killed each other in history actually told him that they wanted to join forces to open up a battlefield behind enemy lines in the Western Wilderness? Hey, Van Cleve, did you know that Stallman was the one who issued the mission to behead you in history? Duque could not stop cursing in his heart, but after thinking about it, he immediately understood Stallman's reason. Duque pretended to take out a handkerchief and wiped the corner of his mouth. My apologies, I'm being rude. I didn't mean to mock you. I just happened to think of something. Van Cleve and Stallman both lowered their heads and counted the non-existent ants on the floor, pretending that they did not see the scene of Duque spitting out water. Duque was now a big shot who had to deal with thousands of affairs every day. The fact that he took the time to meet them was completely due to Van Cleve. Stallman, who was now just a small local sheriff, of course did not dare to say anything. He could only keep his doubts to himself. Duke crossed his fingers and placed them under the tip of his nose, covering half of his face. He had a serious expression on his face. Please note that His Majesty Rin has issued an edict before he went to Lordaeron to seek reinforcements. In order to deal with the possible further invasion of the Orcs, all Stormwind troops are now being reorganized, and they are forbidden from leaving the Hillsbrad Hills. Alright, I want to hear your reasons. The real reasons. The two fellows looked at each other, and Geryon Stallman spoke first. Honorable Duke, I was born and raised in the Westmoreland. I know everything about the Westmoreland. His Majesty has indeed issued an imperial order for the people of the Westmoreland to seek refuge. You have also sent ships to pick up the people of the Westmoreland. But in reality, there are at least 10,000 people who are unwilling to leave their land. They are hiding in various mines, temporarily living on stored food. They need the kingdom's support. The kingdom's future counterattack against Stormwind City will also require their support. Just like when Stormwind City was besieged, it was the food from the Westmoreland that supported Stormwind City. After Geryon finished, Duque looked at Van Cleve. What about you, Master? Van Cleve seemed to find it difficult to speak, but he still said it. When I left Stormwind City, I always wanted to do more for you, Master. Not long after I arrived here, I passed the profession test for thief. The instructor said that I am a genius thief that appears once in 50 years. So I thought that if I lead a team of thieves, it might be more helpful to you, Master. Duque sighed in his heart. Talent was indeed talent. Van Cleve was made to be a thief. But history had completely changed. The Defias Brotherhood that everyone hated in history was destined to never appear again. So it was not surprising that Stallman would follow Van Cleve and seek refuge with him. Everyone knew that he, Duque, could recruit 10,000 private soldiers. As long as he agreed, he could completely bypass the king's ban. Duque thought for a moment. All right. Chapter 210. Duque agreed. Even though he still needed bandits in the future, they would need to be powerful ones. Van Cleve was definitely not up to the task. There were many things he needed to make in the following days, but there was nothing that required Van Cleve's skills. Those who truly needed Van Cleve's skills would have to wait until Stormwind City was rebuilt. Duque had always believed that talent should not be wasted. The two were overjoyed to see Duque agree. They looked at Duque expectantly, waiting to see how much support Duque would give them. Duque cleared his throat. I cannot go against His Majesty's orders. So Garion, you must give up your position as sheriff and become the commander of my private army. No problem. Garion was willing to do anything for the people of the Westfall wilderness. Edwin, you're still new in this field, so you'll be Garion's assistant. Understand? Understood, master. Edwin nodded. Duque pressed his hands on the table and put on a serious expression. As a form of support for your work behind the enemy lines, I'll allow you to recruit 3,000 experienced volunteers in South Shore in my name. I'll pay each of them 2 gold coins in advance. Remember, you are not allowed to recruit soldiers from the Stormwind army. If Duque had done this before the Dark Portal incident, he would have been asking for trouble. But now it was completely different. Among the 50,000 elite soldiers who had withdrawn from Stormwind City, less than half of them were active soldiers. The rest were the private soldiers of various nobles, militia, and even warriors who were born as ordinary citizens. They had experienced the orcs in the past, so they were definitely experts. Both of them heaved a sigh of relief at Duque's words. This was a great support. I can also transfer 3 Bloodsail warships to you as your personal supply ships. But remember, I don't want you to launch too many attacks against the orcs in the first 3 months. You'll be courting death before the orcs' main force invades the northern continent. Also, Duque opened the map and pointed at Moon Creek Town in the western wilderness. I know there's a Moon Creek mine here, and I knew that in the deepest part of the mine, there was a huge hole in the sea that could be used as a secret dock. Therefore, I hope that you will use Moon Creek Town as your base, and turn the Moon Creek mine into the Beastman's death mine. I said it, I really said it. Ha ha ha. Looking at Van Cleef and Stallman's worshipful gazes, Duke's heart was filled with joy. Ha ha ha. I can't believe I taught the boss of the death mines in the history to go to the death mines and trap the orcs. I'm such a genius. Ha 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 ha. Duque laughed in his heart. He laughed proudly and wantonly. Van Cleef, on the other hand, had a look of realization on his face. So when we first mentioned going to the Western Wilderness, you reacted so strongly, because you actually had the same idea. But we both had the same idea. That's right. Duque acted as if he and Van Cleef had a tacit understanding. What else could Duque say in the face of Van Cleef's perfect imagination? Of course he could only say, yes, you're absolutely right. Van Cleef was indeed very happy. After Duque let them leave, Van Cleef returned as soon as he left. Master, what is it? Duque poked his head out from the mountain of documents and requests. Van Cleef was a little bashful. It's like this. Master, you don't seem to have any servants or maids. This doesn't match your status at all. Duque replied calmly. If you say it matches your status, then please take a look at the Queen's and Prince William's palaces. Van Cleef immediately understood what Duque meant. Master, it's actually about my daughter, Vanessa. I'm going to the Western Wilderness now, and I'm afraid it's not safe for me to bring her along. So I was wondering if I could let her be a maid here. When Van Cleef mentioned Vanessa, Duque was stunned. He couldn't help but think of Vanessa Van Cleef in the history, a young girl who had witnessed her father's tragic death with her own eyes. She tried her best to escape capture and survive. When she grew up, she devoted herself to restoring and rebuilding everything that her father had fought for. This sounded like a hero's coming-of-age story, didn't it? Most people would think so. But in this tragic story, the villains were the nobles of Stormwind, including the widely acknowledged wise and great King William. The cause was also the conspiracy of the Princess of the Black Dragons, Onyxia. She tricked Van Cleef, and then in turn tricked Stormwind. Van Cleef's Mason Guild rebuilt Stormwind, and instigated the nobles of Stormwind not to pay the Mason Brotherhood a single coin's wages. This directly led to the Brotherhood's riots and demonstrations. And during the demonstrations, a stone thrown by a Mason killed Queen Tiffany of William's queen. This was a tragedy of an official forcing the people to rebel, and a tragedy created by evil forces. Vanessa Van Cleef's most famous words were, "Hope? Is that how I should feel when I watch you lackeys of the nobles chop off my father's head? To me, hope is just a vicious joke in this cruel world. There is no hope. There is only Vanessa. Thinking of the tragic father-daughter duo, Van Cleef, Duque couldn't help but feel a little warmth in his heart. Let her come. As long as I'm not dead, I won't let her come to harm. Edwin came with his daughter, Vanessa. Little one. Although Duque really wanted to use this adjective to describe Vanessa, it was obvious that it wouldn't work. According to Edwin, Vanessa was only 13 years old, but she was so well-bred. Duque's dog eyes were about to go blind. Vanessa was about 170 meters tall, and had a head of black hair that reached her ears. She wasn't as beautiful as Aurelia, but she still had 80 points. The sturdy dumpling was at least a C cup. Beneath the linen shorts was a pair of long white legs. Note that she was only 13 years old, and still had room to grow. According to the trend of history, she definitely wouldn't be disabled. Duque coughed. From now on, I'm your master. Yes, Master Marcus. The little girl called out reluctantly, her eyes red, as if Duque had forced his father to sell her here. Duque was embarrassed. Just help clean the room, and then learn more combat skills. I don't need a pure maid. Okay, you can go now. Yes. The little girl left, and before she left, she gave her father an extremely aggrieved look. All right, Edwin, come back once every 3 months to report on your work. Also, remember that your master is from MI7. Don't get too close to him. Chapter 211. Duque still had a lot of things to do. The scouts sent back news. The Horde Chief's flag had been replaced with a black hammer, and the dark portal had been opened again. This meant that Orgrim was still the Horde Chief, just like in history. Duque felt that it was a pity. He had already hated Orgrim to this extent, but Orgrim still managed to become the Horde Chief. He didn't know if he should sigh at how strong the inertia of history was, or that a true hero would always be the most dazzling existence no matter what. Duque was worried about his own butterfly effect. The Horde's attack on Stormwind City had expended an unexpected amount of manpower. Without the help of Medivh, which was controlled by Sargeras, the transportation capacity of the Dark Portal was greatly reduced. It would be good if it could only carry a third of what it used to. The Horde could still continuously transport Orc warriors from Draenor. But Duque knew that the warriors that came later were not as strong as the hundreds of thousands of elites that came first. The first batch were either veterans who had gone through the war with the Draenei, or warriors who had proven their strength in cruel hunts. If the Orc elites before the Dark Portal were 10, then the later batch would only be around 7. And Duque's target was the Blackrock tribe, which made it easier for Orgrim to command the Horde. One could imagine that Gul'dan, a despicable and powerful warlock, would provide more powerful warriors for Orgrim in order to save his own life. The Horde acted as they did in history, but the negotiations between the human countries had reached a stalemate. Duque knew that only when the 7 human kingdoms united, along with the dwarves, pygmies, and high elves, would they be able to form the first alliance in the world of Azeroth. The problem was that the alliance that should have been established had not made any progress. According to Lothar's message, Duque knew what had happened. Now the kings and high nobles of many countries, including King Tyrrhenas of Lordaeron, all thought that Lang was just a useless person who couldn't even defend his own country, after being chased away by a troll-like monster. At the end of the day, the root of the problem was Duke the Butterfly. In history, Lang had died, and Lothar had come to the Rotterdam kingdom with a pitiful number of guards and the little prince. Lothar plays the role of a tragic hero. Why were the other 6 human kingdoms willing to elect Lothar as the commander of the alliance? Firstly, it was because of the threat of the tribe. Secondly, it was because of Lothar's noble bloodline. In history, Lothar had acknowledged the human kings as kings in the name of the last son of Sorodin the Great, in exchange for a political union. Thirdly, Stormwind in history had no military strength at all. It was just an empty shell. The countries were most at ease handing their soldiers over to Lothar. At this moment, only Stormwind and the Dwarven Kingdom in the south of the Eastern Kingdom were under attack. The northern continent was still as peaceful as ever, as if nothing had happened. Lothar did not play the card of Thoradin the Great either. The most important thing was that Lang had 50,000 elites under his command. Who would listen to whom, after they united, became a major problem. After all, the split of the Arathar Empire was ultimately due to different ideologies, and no one was willing to submit to the other. Duque was a little anxious. As a transmigrator, he definitely knew which two cards the tribe would play next. The first card was the trolls. They were tall and terrifying humanoid creatures that were thinner than orcs and had two long fangs. They were native to planet Azeroth. As early as 14,000 years ago, the trolls were the rulers of this planet. The trolls had established many large countries, among which the Amani Empire and the Gurubashi Empire had the largest territories. Both empires were ruled by the Zandala tribe, so they were also praised as the Zandala Empire. Even the famous Night Elves were a group of humanoid creatures from the Dark Troll tribe that migrated to the Well of Eternity. They gradually evolved under the influence of the Well's arcane energy. More than 1,000 years ago, it was precisely because of the rise of the human race that the great demons, who had already been split into countless clans, were chased away from the most fertile lands and chased into the barren lands deep in the mountains. The hatred of the trolls towards the humans and the high elves was definitely off the charts. When the orc tribe arrived, they would definitely hit it off. The second card was the forbidden evil existence, the Death Knight. Duque shuddered at the thought of how powerful and terrifying the Death Knight was. After thinking about it, Duque decided to personally promote the establishment of the alliance. The 25th of September was no different from any other day after King Tyreenas of Lordaeron gathered the representatives of the various countries. Endless wrangling, endless sarcasm and ridicule. Among the 9 big shots, other than Lang and Tyreenas who were kings, the other 5 human kingdoms sent dukes. The dwarves sent a brigadier general, and the high elves only sent a substitute counselor. It was these guys who were not even as high as Lang who dared to spit at Lang. What orc rampage? They're just a bunch of troll-like beasts. I didn't expect that the son of Thoradin the Great, who chased away the trolls and made the humans rise, couldn't even defeat a bunch of troll-like guys, and had to run around the sea to escape. It was a Duke of the Gilnea's kingdom who spoke. If it wasn't for the fact that killing this guy would cause a serious international dispute, Lothar almost wanted to smash his white glove on the guy's face. In the end, isn't it all because of your guardian, Medivh? If it wasn't for Medivh's betrayal, would there have been an orc invasion after the dark portal was opened? Would there have been so many problems? Why do the entire human world have to clean up the mess you caused? The representative of the Alterac kingdom followed suit. Enough. Don't you dare insult Medivh. It's obviously the Demon King Sardra's plot. If you continue to insult him, I don't mind challenging you to a duel as Medivh's best friend. This time, even King Lang couldn't take it anymore. As a childhood friend of Lang, Medivh's character was definitely noble. After knowing the truth, Lang also tried his best to protect the reputation of his childhood friend. Even after Medivh's death, Lang continued to work hard for this. Now that this guy had publicly slapped Medivh's face, wasn't this also slapping Lang's face? Since Lang was so tough, that guy finally kept quiet. But there was still no progress in the meeting. At this time, a young mage who had just appeared beside Lang that day, and was ignored by the representatives of the various kingdoms, had a mysterious smile on his face. Chapter 212. 1,000 years of peace had brought about many things. For example, prosperity and numbness. The bustling life in the city made everyone like flowers in a greenhouse that could not withstand any wind and rain. Once a gust of wind called orcs broke the glass window of the greenhouse, they would wither or even wither. In the history, Even if Lothar made a shocking concession and sacrificed the glory of his ancestors, he personally admitted that the era of great Emperor Thoradin was over, and he acknowledged the royal authority of the kings. It still took more than 3 months to complete the integration of the alliance. It was only after the orcs bypassed the Stormguard kingdoms, sought a bridge defense line, and invaded the hinterland of the various kingdoms in the northern continent from the sea that the kingdoms came to their senses. Note that the kingdoms here did not include the Rotterdam Kingdom. The Rotterdam Kingdom, which had the strongest economic and military strength, was almost the last to be attacked because of its geographical location in the north. For a long time, the Rotterdam Kingdom was in a state of local war. They would just spend some money and troops, and then it would not affect them. The nobles sang and danced, and watched the beasts fight. When the battle at the front line was at its most intense, the bastard nobles even went to the Turina's kingdom every day to complain that Lothar was a vampire, which consumed too much of their taxes and manpower. What Duque wanted to do was to awaken the lion. Even if it was old, it was still a lion. Lang and Anduin glanced at Duque. They did not know what Duque was up to, but Duque must have done something. It was because Duque had said that he would use a new method to stimulate a certain king's nerves. What the hell was this new method? Lang and Anduin felt that something was amiss as soon as they heard it. However, they still acquiesced to Duque after the negotiations were not going anywhere. The representatives of the various kingdoms did not stop criticizing the Stormwind. The representative of the Gilneas kingdom pointed at the head of the frozen chief, Black Hand, and mocked King Lang. You said this is the head of the chief of those green-skinned monsters? Maybe this guy is a little big, but who can prove that this is their leader? Didn't you say that they were all intelligent monsters? Why would their leader come to you and let you chop off his head? Stop joking, no king would easily stand at the front lines. Why would the beast men, who clearly have the upper hand, send a great chieftain for you to kill? You! Noxus was enraged. He had risked his life to kill Black Hand. Now it was actually reduced to worthless. Duke, however, stopped Lothar and turned to the representative of Gilneas with a smile. How about this? The army of our Stormwind Kingdom will go to the battlefield at the same time as your army. You can take this big head and shake it in front of the tribe. Let's see who the green-skinned creatures will chase. You! Gilneas' representative suddenly stood up, wanting to ridicule Duque, but at this time, something happened just yesterday, before Duque and his entourage arrived at Lordaeron City. An unfamiliar slave trader presented a batch of special gifts to Menethil II and requested an audience with the king. Everyone knew that the king of Lordaeron would not simply meet with a slave trader who came out of nowhere. If it wasn't for the fact that the slave trader's gifts were good enough, even a person of status would not have appeared. In the end, it was a Viscount of Lordaeron who received the slave trader. The merchant repeatedly told the Viscount who met him that this batch of goods needed to be injected with a tranquilizer made from the peace bloom as the main medicine every 12 hours. Otherwise, the existing restraints and cages would not be able to hold them. The slave trader even sent a formal notice in the form of a document through formal diplomatic channels. This slave trader was obviously someone's subordinate. However, as someone expected, the slave trader's reasonable request was ignored, and all of the slave trader's warnings were ignored. This was the arrogance of Lordaeron, the most powerful of the 7 kingdoms. Arrogance was also a common problem among the nobles of Lordaeron. More than 1,000 years ago, it was the ancestors of these arrogant nobles who transferred their property to the more prosperous Lordaeron region, leaving the descendants of Thoradin the Great to die in the ruined Rapidstream Castle. No one would have thought that more than 1,000 years later, they would also pay a terrible price for their arrogance. After this point in time, the Lordaeron kingdom would perish because of the arrogance and stubbornness of King Turinas. Duque had no intention of stopping this, but the Lordaeron kingdom was still extremely powerful at this point in time, and Duque did not mind using the arrogance of the people of Lordaeron to make them suffer a little. Dang dang dang. The alarm that symbolized the invasion of foreign enemies had not sounded for 1,000 years in this pure white city that was also regarded as a holy city by countless people. When the loud and shrill alarm rang, no one in the entire Lordaeron kingdom reacted. Almost everyone was stunned for more than 3 seconds. Only the most dutiful guards realized after a few seconds that it was a F***king alarm. All of a sudden, the entire Lordaeron was in an uproar. The representative of Gilnis, who was about to scold them, was stunned. As the leader of this place, Menethil II, who thought that he was the noblest among the 7 kings, could not help but be furious. His white beard flared up, and he stared at his servant with his old eyes. "Quickly go and find out what happened. Why did you sound the alarm?" The trouble was at the arena. In this era of lack of entertainment, bloody and exciting gladiatorial competitions were the most attractive entertainment, second to none. There were countless gladiatorial arenas of all sizes in the entire northern continent. Just like Thrall, who was the son of the chief of the Frostwolf clan Durotan, Thrall was picked up by a human after Durotan was assassinated by the assassins of the Shadow Council. After that, Thrall was raised as a slave gladiator for a long time. On the surface, the entire Lordaeron kingdom did not care about the invasion of the orcs. In fact, the slave gladiators of the orcs were definitely in high demand and were the most popular goods in the Lordaeron kingdom. A healthy orc slave warrior could be sold for more than 10,000 gold coins recently, be it the nobles of the Lordaeron kingdom or the black-hearted owners of the gladiatorial arenas. None of them could resist this temptation. There were 100 orcs, and they were all elites of the Blackstone clan. There were even a few personal guards of Blackhand. In order to collect these orcs, someone had put in a lot of effort. After the effects of the mind-calming potion on the orcs wore off, they heard a voice. It was in the orc language. This voice told them that the head of their chief was in the highest castle, and it was being wantonly humiliated and displayed by the humans. Revenge! 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 Driven by their frenzied thoughts, the orcs easily broke free from the iron shackles that were as thick as a human baby's arm, broke the iron bars of the cage, and charged out. Chapter 213. Impossible. The managers of the Colosseum, who dealt with ferocious monsters all day long, and the guards responsible for watching over the slaves, were all stunned. The humanoid monster in front of him was beyond the scope of human imagination. Despite the mysterious merchant's repeated warnings, the guards saw the burly bodies of these orcs and still imprisoned them according to the standards of the trolls. In their opinion, even 2 giant demons wouldn't be able to break free. They were wrong. Beastmen were already stronger than trolls, let alone berserk beastmen who had drunk demon blood. Following a roar that shook the entire arena, 100 berserk beastmen broke free of their cages and charged towards the light. Each and every one of these men, who would definitely be strong and powerful compared to humans, were like children in front of them. The long whips used to punish the slaves would only make them more ferocious. The gigantic fist smashed into the faces of the scarred and ferocious-looking guards, and the abundant power easily smashed everything it came into contact with. His cheekbones instantly collapsed, followed by his temples and lower jaw, and then his entire skull collapsed. Before the human cervical vertebrae could support or cushion the impact, the violent force had already shattered the entire skull. Yellow, white, red, all sorts of colors dyed the walls of the Colosseum, which must have been dyed black with the blood of countless slaves, into the colors of the abusers. Aha! Aha! More guards heard the news and rushed over. They brought the best equipment they could. However, it was useless. These berserk orcs could set off a bloody storm with just a punch or a swing of their arms. By the time the orcs came back to their senses, there was no one alive in the basement except for the orcs. The inexplicable voice seemed to be guiding them, and they seemed to feel the unyielding anger of the great chief, Blackhand, roaring. Loch-Narash, the leader of the Blackhand Guard, shouted, ordering the orcs to arm themselves. They quickly gathered all the heavy weapons they could find, smashed open the door of the arena, and saw light. Lochtar Ogre. He would rather die than win. In this unknown country filled with humans, In this place where enemies were everywhere, the glory of the tribe and the violent demon blood in their bodies drove them to charge towards the tallest and most magnificent building. The city guards were alerted. They rushed over upon hearing the news, and saw a group of peerless monsters with green skin. Don't be afraid. These were orcs. Get into formation and surround him. Before the squad leader could finish shouting, a huge iron pillar that was thicker than a man's thigh had already swept towards them. The leader of the black-handed bodyguards used his unparalleled strength to teach these human warriors, who had never fought against the orcs, a good lesson. This lesson was called strength. The round shields that were neatly lined up in a row did not seem like shields at all. They were easily swept away by the heavy iron pillar in one breath. The sound of the iron shields exploding was mixed with the screams and wails of the city guards, deeply stimulating the nerves of every city guard behind them. Fear gripped their hearts easily. For a moment, even their hearts forgot to beat. Every dilated pupil reflected the horrifying figure that was 3 meters tall. It did not look like a living creature at all, but more like an ancient demon god. Ah! The first row of city guards whose arms were smashed into pieces let out a shrill scream. The second row of city guards was almost stunned. They paid with their lives for the momentary lapse in concentration on the battlefield. The muscles of the orc bodyguards swelled to the point that they were about to explode. With the strength of a giant, the long iron pillar that was swung out with all its might stopped abruptly within half a meter. Then it turned around and swept again. Those who fell to the ground avoided the disaster. The second row of city guards who were stunned on the spot had their bodies sliced in half at the waist. The scene was so bloody that it easily destroyed their rationality. I don't want to die. These city guards who could only bully gangsters and thieves on normal days suddenly lost their will to fight. They collapsed and abandoned their swords and shields, trying to escape from this terrifying charaba in a fluster. Out of the gladiatorial arena was the first street of Rotterdam Kingdom, known as Gladiator Street. This street that mainly sold swords and weapons had always been the favorite of the rich and powerful. Ordinary citizens were not qualified to enter this street. As a subsidiary industry of the gladiatorial arena, this street not only had a large number of high-quality weapons and armor that were far superior to the standard weapons, but also all kinds of rare equipment and accessories. A gladiator with a broken sword and a useless shield would not receive much cheers no matter how good his skills were. The rich and powerful who had gladiators would invest in their favorite gladiators with gorgeous armor and accessories. After all, this was where their pride was. Hence, the leader of the bodyguards found a huge skull of a 6-horned rhinoceros. This huge skull had already become extremely hard after being soaked in molten iron. Together with the 6 huge horns that extended forward, it was a terrifying piece of equipment that could attack and defend. The only problem was that this thing was too heavy. Even the troll slaves could not use it. But now it all belonged to the bodyguards. Holding it, the bodyguards easily caught up with a carriage with a gorgeous noble coat of arms. They crashed into it with their hard and sharp horns. Half a second later, the entire carriage was blasted into pieces, along with the people inside, turning into scarlet scraps. Blood and internal organs dyed the entire Gladiator Street red. When the orcs fought from one end of the long street to the end, they saw a huge square with a fountain, as well as a huge building with pure white walls. Loktar Ogre! The bodyguards let out a deafening roar again. Without hesitation, the 100 orcs launched an attack on the Rotterdam Kingdom, which had the most guards and was the most heavily guarded. Clang, clang, clang! When the Rotterdam Kingdom could not close the drawbridge in time, and even the palace gate was breached, not only were the higher-ups of the Rotterdam Kingdom alarmed, but also a priest who was preaching in the palace's sanctuary. There are actually enemies in the Rotterdam Kingdom? Hearing the battle cries not far away, a burly male priest suddenly stood up. Teacher Fao, I'll go take a look. The archbishop sighed as he watched his disciple lift the heavy war hammer effortlessly. This disciple was good at everything. His devotion to the holy light and his faith in the holy light were also unparalleled. However, He felt that he was a little out of place with the profession of priest. Go! You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.